Part 32. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 315. Law Enforcement Hall. In the hall, several chiefs gathered here, and the head of the Law Enforcement Hall sat in front of the hall, and asked people to treat the chiefs to the best tea. After drinking a sip of tea, Xiaolin, the chief of Kangjianpeak, looked up at his square-faced senior brother, Bai Xing, the head of the Law Enforcement Hall, who was sitting in front of the hall and looked quite majestic. Brother Bai, if we look at the information you gave me before, there is nothing wrong with Musian, so, he knew the Green Emperor because he got the immortal fate later, Xiaolin asked with a frown. After the Ascension Conference ended yesterday, Xiaolin came to the Law Enforcement Hall with several other chiefs. The information about any disciple in the sect can be found in the Law Enforcement Hall. If it was an ordinary disciple, these chiefs would naturally not care, but the Green Emperor came to watch the Ascension Conference for no reason yesterday, and it just happened that he came to Musian's martial arts arena. This made people a little concerned. Moreover, there was news from the Dogon dynasty today that the Green Emperor went to the Dogon dynasty last night and seemed to have negotiated something with the national teacher in a friendly manner. There is no doubt that this was also for Musian. These two things together cannot help but make people pay attention. After all, it is a bit unbelievable that a great man in the Hedeo realm would care so much about a small cultivator. A few days ago, Yi Hao, Yu Zian, Yan Ruyu and other chiefs took turns to break through the bottleneck that had been difficult for several years or even 10 years, and before they broke through, it happened that the Green Emperor was going through the tribulation. It is hard not to believe that there is no connection between the two. Ning Yuan said slowly. The deputy chief of Kangjianpeak looked at Yi Hao opposite casually, and saw him drinking tea happily as if no one was around, and couldn't help but say, "Junior brother Yi, don't you have anything to say?" This Yi Hao's realm was originally not as good as his deputy chief, but since that day when he suspected that he had obtained the immortal fate to break through the bottleneck, his strength has greatly increased, and he has not encountered any bottleneck period until now. Even the chief who cultivates himself and cultivates his temperament can't hold it back. If this progress continues, the strength of Yi Hao and others will probably be far behind them in the future. Yi Hao brewed tea leisurely and said with a smile, "Senior brothers, please don't make things difficult for me. I can't disclose the matter of Senior Kingdi. If she knows about it, won't it cost me my life?" Hall Master Bai Xing smiled and said, "We don't mean to make things difficult for you, I just want to ask you a question. Does the inner disciple accepted by junior sister Yan have a great relationship with Kingdi? Is he even valued by Kingdi?" When Bai Xing said this, he looked at Yi Hao gently. Among the several chiefs, Yi Hao has the shortest lifespan, but now his realm has risen greatly, and the reason is because of the immortal fate that Kingdi gave him when he was promoted to Hedeo that day. At first, the chiefs who had never received the immortal fate thought that Yi Hao was lucky, but now it seems, this is not good luck, it is clearly a backdoor. Musian and Bairuoxi, the inner disciple of Kanghai Peak, are Taoist companions, and Kingdi is suspected to have received help from Musian, so he takes good care of him. With this relationship, it can also explain why Yan Ruyu and others have successively obtained the immortal fate granted by Kingdi. Under the gaze of several chiefs, Yi Hao gently put down the teacup, sighed, and said, "Senior brothers, it's not that I don't want to tell you, but the Kingdi doesn't like to be disturbed, so I and the other chiefs can only hide the secret as much as possible." As soon as these words came out, several chiefs couldn't hold it anymore and started to curse. "Shameless old man. Humph. I have never seen such a shameless person like you." Several chiefs were jealous all of a sudden, and they wanted to tear Yi Hao apart on the spot. The immortal fate of the great power of Hedeo is originally about the word fate, which can be encountered but not sought. As a result, the other party knew about this immortal fate and ate it alone. Now, Yi Hao has eaten his fill, leaving several brothers still standing still. In fact, This is also a kind of good fortune and destiny. Yihao was very humble and bowed to several senior brothers. For a while, the senior brothers knew why Yihao and his gang had been sending pills to Tianhewen every now and then. At first, they thought it was because several people in Tianhewen were inner disciples, so the senior brothers paid so much attention to them. As a result, it seems now, these senior brothers may have taken a fancy to the Qing emperor behind Muzian from the beginning. No wonder junior sister Yan chose Muzian as an inner disciple in the past. She might have seen this step from the beginning. An elder spoke with a sigh. When Yihao heard this, there was a little more doubt in his eyes. It stands to reason that when selecting inner disciples, Muzian had not met Qing emperor at all. How could she be because of Qing emperor? Maybe it's for Linglong, or maybe, Muzian has other secrets? Okay, all of you calm down. How can this be? We are in the Ascension Conference now, and maybe some disciples will come to report the situation of the Ascension Conference later. You all calm down, don't let the disciples laugh at you, Bai Xing said slowly. Bai Xing is quite respected by the leaders, so no matter how angry they are, they all calm down. Then, Bai Xing looked at Yihao gently. In the past, the deputy head of my law enforcement hall told me that Linglong had come to the law enforcement hall with Muzian. Could it be that this disciple had also obtained the immortal fate of Linglong? Yihao hesitated for a moment, then nodded slightly. At this time, the deputy chief of Huabao Peak snorted coldly and said, "The spirit dragon lives in Tianhe Garden. How could Muzian's disciple not have the fate of the spirit dragon?" As soon as these words came out, several chiefs were moved, and their eyes looking at Yihao became more and more unfriendly. The chiefs of Daofeng, Tianjifeng, Kangshu Pavilion, and other places did not come, so Yihao, the beneficiary, became the target of concentrated fire. They felt a sense of regret for missing out on billions of spirit stones. However, Bai Xing's eyes were still indifferent, looking at Yihao and smiling. "Junior brother, speaking of it, you seem to have returned to the 6th level of the void now. Find time to go to the Shenxiantai to practice with senior brother tomorrow." Yihao's face instantly became bitter. These days, nearly 80% of the 8 treasure cranes of Kanghai Peak have been eaten by spirit dragons. There are only a few spirit birds left after so much hard work, and they are even being criticized. The only way to describe his mood at the moment is to feel wronged. Well, in addition, there is also a feeling of being extremely happy. If you must say, his 8 treasures crane was not eaten in vain. At least when Linglong ate the 8 treasures crane before, he also gave him a blessing of luck, which is of great benefit to his future practice. A few 8 treasures cranes, it's okay to eat them. Calculating the time, I haven't left the law enforcement hall for a long time, and I don't have a big idea of the current situation of the disciples. Bai Xing paused and smiled. Why not take advantage of today to go out and relax, and by the way, go to Muzian's disciple to see, what do you think? Several people nodded in agreement, obviously unwilling to give up. Some of them have been stuck in a bottleneck for nearly 10 years without any movement. Now there is a huge fairy fate, and no one wants to let it go. Yihao looked at the scene and shook his head helplessly. The Qing emperor gave them immortal fate because of Muzian, but such favors are limited after all. The Qing emperor would not give immortal fate to other chiefs just because of Muzian. After all, the thunder tribulation of the combined way only happens once, and there is only so much immortal fate that can be borne. Even if he makes friends with Muzian now, it may be too late. No matter how big Muzian's face is, he will not persuade the Qing emperor to give immortal fate to other chiefs. After all, it is too rash to do so and disrespectful to the Qing emperor. Of course, Yihao naturally cannot sabotage it now, so he also left the hall with several chiefs and flew to the direction of Tianhe Garden. Tianhe Garden. After the spiritual energy circulated in his body for several cycles, Muzian slowly opened his eyes. The Tianhuang technique can burn the cauldron and revive the exhausted spiritual energy. If this technique is used in battle, it is equivalent to one life fighting two lives. After last night's efforts, Musian finally found that it was impossible to make any progress in a short time. This technique is for demon cultivators to practice. It seems a bit difficult for a human cultivator like me to get in touch with this thing. Musian looked at the ring left by the first generation of Demon King, shook his head and sighed secretly. In theory, the technique is not divided into demon cultivators or cultivators, at least most of the techniques are universal. And he had refined a Tiandan phoenix fruit before, which greatly lowered the threshold for practice. However, even so, it is still unrealistic to want to enter the threshold in a short time. The threshold for practicing the first grade technique is much higher than he imagined. The situation yesterday was special, otherwise I should ask the Queen of the Demon World, maybe she can give me some useful advice, Musian thought to himself. Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbs feed -01, container, tabula below article feed, placement, below article feed, target. Type, mix. I've seen her too often these past 2 days. I'd better take a break to avoid being annoying. At least I should give her some useful information before I go to her again. Musian's mind flashed with thoughts. After getting out of bed, he tidied his hair in front of the bronze mirror, then changed into his own robes and left. It was already early morning before he knew it. Gu Boxing sneaked into Tianhe Garden yesterday without leaving any traces. Normal cultivators could not tell that a great battle had broken out in the depths of Tianhe Garden last night. The courtyard was covered with thick snow in winter. Musian was walking in front of the courtyard. At this moment, he suddenly felt a terrifying aura quietly spreading from the direction of a room. Only Yao Meng and Ling Long can exert such pressure, right? Musian's mind moved slightly, and he followed the direction of the terrifying spiritual energy. At the same time, on the other side, the two great masters of the Hedao had a brilliant period in the past. There is only one great master of the Hedao in each life, and they can suppress the geniuses of the same period and integrate into the great Dao. It is enough to imagine what kind of extraordinary women they are. At this moment, facing the original witch who declared her sovereignty, Yao Meng was as indifferent as before. She smiled in her eyes, but her voice was cold. I don't know if you had a Taoist relationship with him in the past, but at least I met him earlier than you in this life, and he also showed love to me in the past. When the original witch heard this, she sneered on the spot, that's just that he didn't know your identity in the past and was deceived by your appearance. If he knew that the person he was interested in turned out to be a woman who had existed in the world for thousands of years, probably I've been far away from you for a long time. If Musian were present, he probably wouldn't be able to help but complain in his heart, isn't the eldest sister the most perfect creature? They are integrated with Tao, have a very deep foundation, and are stunningly beautiful. It can be said that they have almost no shortcomings. Who doesn't like a big sister who is strong, has a deep background, and can always come up with high-grade medicinal materials to give you as gifts? If I have to say the biggest problem, probably most of the powerful beings are extremely arrogant and possessive beings. If Musian didn't operate them properly before, they would probably be waiting in a dark room now. However, among these possessive people, there are some exceptions. For example, Yao Meng is one of them. Yao Meng's beautiful eyes were still indifferent, the fairy mist lingering around her body added a bit of haziness to her red lips parted slightly, and she said, whether you like him or not has nothing to do with me, and I don't intend to argue with you about who comes first. After whom? Rather, if you were really a Taoist companion with him in your previous life, it would be a pleasant thing for me. There was a trace of doubt in the eyes of the original witch, and she said, what do you mean by this? The flawless fairy in the eyes of the world tilted her head slightly, with a faint smile in her green eyes, and she said quietly, let your Taoist companion gradually become mine. This feeling will make people very happy. After a slight pause, Yao Meng opened her red lips and said again, "Your Taoist companion, last night was great." The air seemed to freeze for a moment. And the original witch's originally soft and weak eyes also quietly turned cold. Half an hour ago. In the early morning, white mist shrouded the air and fine snow danced. Musian stood in front of the courtyard, raising his hands and stretching leisurely. "I haven't experienced this feeling of peace of mind in practicing for a long time." Musian looked up at the white courtyard and sighed sincerely. During this period of time, he worked day and night to make his own contribution to the prosperity of Dongzhou. Although the natural furnace cauldron recovers quickly, it is still good to be able to relax a little occasionally. He walked along the path in the courtyard to the house where Wei Mengru was. In the past, Wei Mengru always kept a certain distance from him, but since that day when she took the initiative to confess her love, the relationship between them has heated up sharply. If it were now, she might be able to tease Sister Mengru again. Musian was thinking about such things leisurely, and before he knew it, he came to the end of the trail. He raised his head and happened to see a figure in a spotless green dress not far away. She was standing in front of the window sill of a certain cabin. Her long blue and white skirt lined her ice muscles and jade bones. Her figure was as graceful as an immortal, and her body seemed to be surrounded by immortals. The fog is not stained by the dust. Yao Meng? What was she doing by Sister Mengru's window? There was a trace of doubt in Musian's eyes, and he was about to say hello. However, when he was about to get closer, his eyes suddenly froze slightly, and soon he saw another woman in front of the window sill. Wei Mengru. She was wearing a black robe, her skin was as white as snow, and she looked a little sickly and pitiful. "No, it's not Sister Mengru, it's the original witch." She woke up from her deep sleep. This woman who looks soft and frail is the original witch who was the owner of the World Sea in the past. Then, I heard what Yao Meng said. "Your Taoist companion, last night was great." Musian thought deeply, then suddenly realized, then, suppressing his accelerated heartbeat, he turned around silently. Although Musian also knows that escaping is shameful and useless, at least he will come back sooner or later to solve the problem. At this time, he suddenly felt a noisy sound coming from outside the garden, so he calmed down a little and came to the front of the garden, where he happened to see a few unfamiliar monks. Musian quickly recognized Bairuoxi's master among them, and asked doubtfully, "Yi Xiaozhuo, why are you here?" "The leaders were a little concerned about your performance and skills yesterday, so they came to visit you." Yi Hao smiled back. Musian said and glanced at the leaders calmly. He naturally saw that these leaders could not be here for his performance. After all, he is now a disciple of Zhang's Huge. What is the use of them coming to him? Can you guide him to practice? Of course, it is impossible to tell the truth. After all, these leaders are high-level officials in the sect, and he will not do anything to offend others. After a few pleasantries, the leader of the law enforcement hall went straight to the point and said with a smile, "I heard that Senior Kingdi is meditating here. Her spiritual energy seems to have not been fully recovered, so she brought some pills. I wonder if she is now." Sure enough, Musian was not surprised, but he still said politely, "Sir, you guys came at the wrong time, Sister Xianzi." He paused and changed his words, "Senior Kingdi is busy with other things now. I'm afraid I won't be able to see her for the time being." "It doesn't matter, I can take a look in this villa first. If it doesn't work, I'll put down the elixir and leave." Another leader on the side said with a smile. The other party had said this, so Musian had no choice but to lead several heads with gentle smiles into the villa. When passing a small house, several people soon noticed the fairy in green skirt standing by the window sill. They looked at each other, and there was a hint of meaning in their eyes. The Green Emperor is indeed here. At this time, Bai Xing's eyes suddenly fixed on another woman in front of the window sill. "Who is this woman, and why is her aura so mysterious? Musian looked at several people calmly, and then looked at the slender green figure not far away, and then lowered his voice and said, "Heads, please follow me." After saying that, he was about to walk into the hall, but at this time, Yao Meng, who was not far away, seemed to have noticed Musian's presence. She looked at him slightly, and then a faint smile appeared in her beautiful green eyes. "Mu Lang, you are back so soon." Musian's scalp tingled. Several leaders were stunned for a moment, and when they figured out what was happening, their eyelids twitched involuntarily. It was not until now that they finally realized that Musian's words just now seemed not to be a tactful rejection of them, but they came at the wrong time. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 316. In fact, before this, several leaders had made some extremely ridiculous speculations. For example, could it be that Emperor Qing cared so much about Musian not just because he had saved Emperor Qing? However, this guess was too outrageous, so they did not want to delve deeper into the matter. But now, there is no need to guess anymore. As that sweet voice like the sound of nature sounded in everyone's heart, the faces of the leaders seemed indifferent, but in fact, there was a turmoil in their hearts. No matter how skilled a painter is, it would be impossible to depict the wonderful expressions of these people at this moment. When the leaders heard the title of Mu Lang, their faces first flashed with a dull look, and then they felt unbelievable surprise. Then, they suddenly secretly took a shallow breath, exhaled it slowly, and let his face remained as calm as before. On the surface, he looks as calm as an old dog, but in reality he is quite panicked. Even though they all realized that they came at the wrong time, King Di's words Mu Lang were not meant for others to hear, but were aimed at another woman in the house. The silver-haired woman in the room also looked a little strange, at least they really had no impression of this woman. But all in all, as Musian said, they did come at the wrong time. At first, they thought Musian was rejecting them tactfully, but they never thought that this disciple had just sincerely considered for them. At this moment, time seemed to have completely stopped. Yi Hao calmed down a little and said helplessly to Musian, "Little friend Mu, you really hit it deeply." Musian sent a message and replied, "If I explain this matter to the chiefs in the past, the chiefs probably won't believe what I say." When Yi Hao heard this, he nodded without any trace. This is true. If in the past, someone told them that Qing Emperor had a Taoist companion, and he was a disciple of the God-refining realm in their section, they would probably only be scolded by them for making random jokes and being disrespectful to Qing Emperor. But now, they wouldn't believe it if they heard from anyone else that Musian and Qing Emperor were Taoist couples, but if they heard it from Qing Emperor himself, they wouldn't believe it even if they heard it from Qing Emperor himself. But the question is, doesn't Musian have a Taoist partner? Just as countless questions were flashing through the minds of the leaders, Musian, on the other side, had straightened his thoughts slightly, looked up at Yao Meng, and showed a spring-breathing smile. The leaders didn't know Sister Fairy in the past. "I live here, so after learning about it today, I wanted to come over and see you." Afterwards, Musian paused for a moment and continued, "I'll treat the heads to the hall to rest first. This is a valid reason, right? There are guests now, so don't bother me for the time being. I'll go and entertain some of the leaders first, and then I'll break them down one by one when the anger subsides." Musian cursed in his heart. "Heads-in-chief, please come with me." Musian warmly welcomed them to their seats. However, Yi Hao stood motionless on the spot and said with a smile, "Speaking of which, our Kanghai sect still has some important things to deal with today. This time I came to Tianhewan just to repay what Senior Qing Emperor gave me that day. The grace of immortality." Musian's head jumped slightly. If he followed him into the hall now, Musian would not be the only one to be sucked into the whirlpool. However, these old foxes are not fooled at all. Yi Hao took out an exquisite small wooden box from the ring. These three are all 6th grade UN building pills, which can greatly improve the monk's cultivation progress. He took out another jade bottle and said with a smile, these 7th grade elixirs can restore part of the spiritual energy. They may not have much effect on Senior Kingdi, but they are also the junior's thoughts. When Bai Xing and others on the side saw this, their eyes looked at the head of Kang Hai Peak with a bit of weirdness. The 6th grade elixir that Yi Hao had prepared at the beginning was clearly not a UN building pill. It seemed that he had made temporary adjustments after learning about the relationship between Musian and Qing Emperor. The medicinal materials for refining the Baiwen pill are quite rare, but for a powerful person like Kingdi in the Hedeo realm, this Baiwen pill has no effect at all. But what about Musian? Kingdi couldn't use it, but Musian could. Even if a powerful person in the Hedeo realm wanted to collect all the medicinal materials for the UN building pill and refine them, it would take some time. At this time, Bai Xing and his usually serious face also showed a faint smile at this moment. Last time when little friend Mu came to the law enforcement hall, I was still in seclusion. Today, I saw him as a genius. I also noticed yesterday's performance. If you don't dislike him, just accept these two 6th grade elixirs. He took out a jade bottle from the Naja, and then took out a special small wooden box, and continued, I heard that Senior Qing Emperor's spiritual energy has not been fully recovered, so I specially prepared 2 Tianlong vines and directly refined them. It can be transformed into elixirs or taken into pills, which will have good miraculous effects. The eyes of the leaders all fell on Bai Xing and the small wooden box in his hand almost instantly, and then they looked at the upright-looking senior brother with strange eyes. This Tianlong vine was obtained by Bai Xing in the past when he had not yet become the master of the law enforcement hall. He had gained experience in the cave where the ancient great power had fallen. In the past, many senior officials in the sect had taken a fancy to these 2 Tianlong vine, but they were all rejected. Shirahoshi and flatly refused. Under normal circumstances, cultivators can only rely on themselves to pass the tribulation. This Tianlong vine naturally cannot help cultivators cheat, but it can protect the cauldron when the cultivator passes the tribulation. If the tribulation fails, this Tianlong vine can protect the cauldron and prevent its realm from falling. If Musian had this Tianlong vine when he was in the martial world before, even if he failed to pass the tribulation, there would be no side effects. The head of the law enforcement hall was quite heroic at the first move, and it can even be said that he spent a lot of money. At this time, the other 3 chiefs on the side also took out pills or medicinal materials from the ring. Yao Meng never spoke, but just looked at Musian. This scene was naturally seen by several chiefs. The people present were all old foxes, so they naturally knew what this action meant. The meaning of her eyes was obviously to see what Musian meant. If Musian shook his head, whether it was pills or medicinal materials, Kingdi would not accept them. You decide for yourself, don't worry about me. Musian sent a message to Yao Meng. Most of the pills given by the chiefs would be worthless if placed in the outside world, but for the great masters of Hedeo, most of the pills and medicinal materials are of no great use. The chiefs naturally knew about this, so the pills and medicinal materials they took out were all that Musian could use. If all these medicinal materials were refined, he might be able to upgrade 2 grades in a short period of time, because these things were also the treasures of the chiefs. If it weren't for the Green Emperor, it would be impossible to give them to others. Yao Meng looked at Musian with a faint smile in his eyes, and a clear voice like the sound of nature came softly in front of the hall. In this case, thank you for your kindness, fellow Taoists. If I am free one day, I will find a time to come and thank you. Bai Xing and others finally relaxed their hearts after hearing this. They looked at each other and then raised their hands to bow. Being able to be involved with the Green Emperor is a good fortune in itself. Musian looked at the scene and couldn't help but sigh inwardly. He was used to being with Yao Meng, and he almost forgot the true identity of this fairy, but in fact, She was recorded in ancient books as the Green Emperor, only at this time could he deeply realize this. After sighing for a moment, looking at the chiefs who were about to leave, Musian soon noticed a faint look in front of the window sill, and he looked over. The original witch. Musian suddenly came to his senses. Damn, what should I do if you just leave like this? He finally reacted, raised his head and looked at the chiefs, and immediately said, since the chiefs are here, why don't you sit down and have a cup of tea and chat? His original plan was to sit down and chat with the chiefs in the hall for a while, and wait until Yao Meng and the original witch were almost calm before defeating them one by one. But if these masters just leave like this? At this time, Yao Meng said calmly, I will still guide him in his practice later. If you have nothing to do, please go back first. The masters who were originally stopped by Musian looked at Musian meaningfully after hearing this. They no longer hesitated, raised their hands and bowed, and turned into streams of light and left Tianhe Garden. Musian looked at the scene and fell into a brief contemplation. Soon, he calmed down his thoughts a little, looked up at the sky, and said with emotion, I have never seen the masters so concerned about certain things in the past. This time is really eye-opening. The road to practice is bumpy. Even those geniuses in the past mostly died halfway. Those masters are open-minded and will not give up as long as there is a chance to break through the bottleneck, Yao Meng said calmly. At this time, the original witch who had been silent all the time also spoke softly, most of the geniuses of my time have died. Even those who have not died have basically no hope of making further progress in their lifetime. They can only wait for their lifespan to pass away in that realm. Musian showed a thoughtful sigh, there are many dead bones on the road to becoming an immortal. Even geniuses with high talent may be stuck in a certain realm and grade once they lack the blessing of luck, and there is no hope of breaking through. Yes. The original witch quietly appeared beside Musian. Under Yao Meng's gaze, she gently took one of his arms and said in a gentle tone, so we should cherish the time we spend together. What do you think, Mu Lang? When it comes to the word Mu Lang, the tone is even more emphasized, as if deliberately imitating Yao Meng's tone just now, and even glanced at her. However, Yao Meng always looked at the scene with a smile, without any anger. Although she was against Musian being intimate with other girls, if the memory of the original witch was not wrong, the original witch and Musian in the previous life were originally a Taoist couple, so there was no need to stop them. Even if there was no such reason, even if it was to maintain the image of a fairy, she would not be able to stop the original witch at this moment. When Musian noticed that the soft figure of the original witch suddenly approached him, his heart sank at first, and then, when he realized that the fairy in front of him seemed to be unshakable, he couldn't help but look up at her, but found that Yao Meng was always looking at him with a faint smile, as if she didn't mind. This scene not only made Musian, but also the eyes of the original witch hidden under the hood had a little more doubt. He was obviously still taunting her, but after she took the lead in launching the offensive, Kingbi didn't show any expression at all. However, she wanted to think about it again, but at this moment, the original witch still gently held Musian's arm and looked at Yao Meng, with a faint smile in her silver eyes hidden under the hood. In her opinion, this was already her victory, because at this moment Musian showed no intention of struggling and seemed to acquiesce to her arm-holding action. Of course, it may also be because Musian is restricted by spiritual energy at the moment. Sorry. Musian said to Yao Meng. Maybe in the eyes of the world, this fairy is a kind big sister, but Musian has slept with her several times, so he probably understands her. This fairy is obviously black when cut open, I don't mind it now, but no one knows if she is thinking about something dangerous. As Musian knew Yao Meng well, Yao Meng gently licked his pink lips, making the soft lips a little more moist. Then, a soft and melodious voice gently sounded in Musian's mind, if you really want to apologize, wouldn't it be better to find a better way to express your love tonight? Then, her green eyes fell on the original witch. If you just look at her appearance, this woman looks like a sickly eldest lady. She is holding Musian's arm at the moment, and her silver eyes are looking towards her with a faint smile, as if she is declaring her sovereignty. Your breath is still very weak. You probably won't be able to maintain this body for more than half an hour, Yao Meng said in a calm tone, looking very indifferent. It had been almost half an hour since she had just talked with the original witch. If the original witch continues to maintain this body, it will become more difficult for her spiritual consciousness to be fully restored in the future. When Musian heard this, he also looked at the black-robed woman beside him. Even he could vaguely feel the weakness of the original witch at this moment. It's better not to force yourself until you find a way to fully recover your spiritual consciousness, he said. The original witch glanced at Yao Meng and saw her smiling and indifferent look. Her beautiful eyebrows could not help but frown. What Yao Meng said just now was still vivid in her mind, and she was a little uneasy about letting Musian and Yao Meng be together. However, as Yao Meng said, her current spiritual consciousness is far from enough to recover and cannot maintain Wei Mengru's body for too long. You have to protect yourself while I'm away. The original witch looked up at him and said softly. Musian could clearly feel that the aura of the original witch was gradually disappearing, which also meant that her spiritual consciousness was about to enter a deep sleep state. While Ling was watching this scene, Yao Meng quietly came to Musian's side with light steps. Under the gaze of the original witch, he gently kissed his face, leaving his own traces. Then, she glanced sideways inadvertently, and her red lips moved slightly. A soft and melodious voice then sounded in the ears of the original witch, "Your Taoist companion, I will experience it for you tonight. Whether it's his body or his natural furnace." Looking at the original witch's eyes that were getting colder, Yao Meng's lips curved slightly, and he was about to pull Mu Jian into the hall. However, at this moment, she suddenly felt something was not quite right. The aura of the original witch that had disappeared suddenly filled the space again. Musian also noticed this scene, so he turned his head subconsciously and saw the shadow of a silver-haired beauty floating out of Wei Mengru's body. The original witch. Musian was surprised and said, "You left Sister Mengru's cauldron." It stands to reason that the original witch's spiritual consciousness should be left in Wei Mengru's cauldron to be safe and nourished, but she actually ran out of Wei Mengru's cauldron. However, the original witch did not answer Musian's question. She just came to him lightly and said seriously, "Whether it is your feelings or your body, they all belong to me alone. So dash." The original witch put her slender fingers on Musian's chest and smiled slightly, "This place will be my hotbed from now on." She glanced at Yao Meng lightly, and then her spiritual consciousness quietly sneaked into Musian's body and occupied the natural furnace that should have belonged to Yao Meng. This scene also caused the indifferent smile on Yao Meng's face to gradually fade away. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 317. As the original witch's consciousness infiltrated Musian's natural furnace, she made a pleasant voice that seemed to be satisfied. Yao Meng blinked her beautiful eyes, and her green eyes slightly widened. She looked a little surprised, even incredible. Her usual indifferent smile that seemed to be out of touch with the world was restrained a little, and a big question mark popped up in her mind. I was actually cheated in front of someone. The fairy from the Yaokai Holy Land suddenly felt an incredible sense of absurdity. In the past, she had experienced more than several kinds of pleasure from Musian. In addition to Musian, who turned into a dog licker day and night, she also experienced spiritual satisfaction several times. And this kind of spiritual satisfaction comes from the pleasure brought by the cuckold. Musian's Tiansheng furnace can only accommodate the spiritual consciousness of a great power of Hedao at most. In other words, as long as the original witch enters his Tiansheng furnace, Yao Meng will never be able to set foot in it again, unless the original witch chooses to leave Musian's body. To put it bluntly, Musian's Tiansheng furnace is like a single guest room. Even if the realm is improved, it can only accommodate one spiritual consciousness. After all, it is the spiritual consciousness of a great power of Hedeo. Not everyone's cauldron can accommodate such a great power. Only a special cauldron like Tiansheng furnace can do it. If it were an ordinary person, I am afraid that the spiritual consciousness of the Hedeo realm would just enter it, and the cauldron would shatter because it could not bear it. This is also an important reason why Yao Meng has never found someone who can help her in the past. In the past, Yao Meng had even prepared to die completely, but she never thought that she would encounter Tiansheng furnace in the end, and it was a Tiansheng furnace that had been enhanced several times. Because of this natural furnace, the fairy Yao Meng awakened a very special interest. This interest made her completely live up to the name of Green Emperor. She kept her intimacy with Musian secret from Bairu Oxi, kissed her beloved brother Mu in front of Ya Lingxian, and Qian'er, who secretly loved brother Mu, was her disciple. It can be said that Yao Meng cheated on several girls at the same time in the past. However, even Yao Meng would not have thought that she would be cheated on one day. And she was cheated in front of her. No one expected that the original witch would make such a decision at the last critical moment. Musian's spiritual consciousness swept over the Tiansheng furnace. After noticing the dormant spiritual consciousness hidden in the furnace, he couldn't help but look up and said helplessly, "She is asleep." Yao Meng quickly woke up from his previous thoughts. After all, she was the empress who had experienced thousands of years. She seemed to be in a good mood. She looked at him with a smile and said, "The original witch's spiritual consciousness is still very weak. If it can be nurtured in your body, it would be fine." However, Yao Meng's voice suddenly changed. "The spiritual energy in my furnace is also missing a lot, and it also needs the spiritual energy in the Tiansheng furnace, so." Although he didn't continue to say it, Musian already knew what Yao Meng meant. "Anyway, I will cheat on you if you enter the furnace, and I will do it in front of you." This is probably what Yao Meng wants to express at this moment. Musian sighed in his heart, looked at the bright figure in the green skirt with a sincere face, and stared at the face with a charming smile. Then, he held Yao Meng's slender hand and said softly, "I said before, no matter how much spiritual energy the fairy needs, I will do my best to satisfy you." At least they didn't fight, so this result is already good, Musian comforted himself in his heart. If it weren't for the fact that the original witch was not strong enough now, they would fight in Tianhe Garden, and then the fight would get out of hand. The one in trouble would be him. While speaking, Musian secretly observed Yao Meng's face. If she still cared about the original witch, he would continue to comfort her. At worst, before the competition of the Ascension Conference started today, he would turn into a dog and lick her until she felt comfortable before leaving. On the contrary, if Yao Meng didn't care, then this matter would be stopped and skipped for the time being. The fairy who was not stained by dust narrowed her eyes and said lightly, "Yesterday I went to the Dogon dynasty. This means that this matter is temporarily over." Musian is a smart man and immediately understood what he meant. "You went to find Gu Boxing." I didn't expect that the spiritual energy in Yao Mengding furnace had not yet fully recovered, but it was so sharp that it noticed that Gu Boxing had sneaked into Tianhe Garden last night. Both Musian and Gu Boxing underestimated the Hedeo realm. After all, without ever peeking into that realm, it is naturally impossible to imagine what kind of powerful means such a powerful being has. It is not realistic to use common sense to guess the strength of the other party. Thinking about it this way, Gu Boxing is really unlucky. When he was in the World Sea in his early years, he got a fairy fate left by the original witch. As a result, he is now obsessed with the original witch and wants to find the fairy fate left by the original witch in Zhuzhu through the body of doom. However, Gu Boxing obviously didn't expect that the original witch he was looking for was the body of doom he mentioned. If he could deduce the secrets of heaven, he should actually test his own luck first. Musian shook his head speechlessly. Gu Boxing's bad luck was no less than Wei Mengru's. I ran into an acquaintance when I left last night, Yao Meng suddenly said. Under Musian's doubtful gaze, she spoke again, Reincarnation Queen. The people around Sister Lingxian. Musian whispered to himself. Do you think I or she is meddling? Yao Meng suddenly asked casually. Musian shook his head and smiled. Both you and Sister Lingxian are thinking about me, which is a happy thing. If it were someone else, they would probably feel ashamed or even embarrassed, but Musian had planned to eat this soft rice from the beginning, so how could he feel ashamed? It's better to say that there is a sense of joy that the fish in the fish pond have fattened up. Yao Meng smiled brightly and took out a ring from her sleeve and handed it to Musian. Then put away the elixirs of the first few masters just now. Your improvement in cultivation is also a help to me. Seeing Musian take the ring, Yao Meng couldn't help but nodded secretly and smiled indifferently. So far, Musian's performance has not disappointed her. Compared with those so-called geniuses who are arrogant and have strange dignity, Musian's frankness is more to her liking. When Musian secretly expressed his love to her, Yao Meng had considered the future. In the past, Yao Meng had never considered a Taoist partner. The main reason was that her own talent crushed the geniuses of her time. In this case, the so-called talent and background power naturally had no appeal to her. Musian's talent was outstanding, but she had seen too many so-called geniuses. There might not be one person who could truly be in harmony with the Tao in 5,000 years. What she valued was Musian's sincerity towards her, his ability to adapt, and, he had a Taoist partner. And Musian's lack of strange dignity also made her very satisfied. She had no shortage of these natural treasures, nor did she lack any elixirs, but Musian needed these things. In the end, Musian's becoming stronger was also good for her, so she could save a lot of worry if he could accept these elixirs so straightforwardly. Although the two Taoist companions around Musian didn't seem to be vegetarians, Gong Lianyu was not mentioned for the time being. Although the original witch looked weak, her methods were quite sharp and decisive. Thinking of what the original witch said before entering Musian's natural furnace, Yao Meng's eyes were filled with a bit of deep coldness. At this time, Musian suddenly asked, by the way, fairy sister, have you ever heard of the heavenly court? Yao Meng's thoughts were slightly restrained, and she looked at Musian in surprise. Where did you know about it? It seems that she really knows about this. Musian roughly explained the matter of the first generation of Demon King's hidden skills in the pilgrimage hall. He and King Di already knew each other well, so Musian naturally had no need to hide it deliberately. The heavenly phoenix skills fell into your hands. Hearing this, Yao Meng's eyes lit up, and there was a bit of surprise in his eyes when he looked at Musian. When the heavenly phoenix technique is cultivated to the extreme, it can protect the spiritual consciousness, rebirth through nirvana, and allow the spiritual energy to fill the body 9 times in an instant. Although the threshold for cultivation is extremely high, if you can learn this technique, it will definitely be of great benefit to you in the future. After she finished speaking, her eyes became more thoughtful. However, the heavenly phoenix technique actually originated from the heavenly court. This is the first time I have heard of this. What exactly is that heavenly court? Musian asked without shame. Yao Meng woke up from his previous thoughts and said, in the past, some people believed that the heavenly court did not belong to the 9 provinces, but was above the heavens, and those who merged with the Tao could ascend to the heavenly court. The heavenly court is the immortal realm. Musian heard the meaning of Yao Meng's words. The two are the same concept. Yao Meng nodded slightly. With some thought in her eyes, she said softly, the first generation Demon King was the first person to practice the heavenly phoenix technique. He probably knows some secrets about the heavenly court. But now he is completely dead. There is probably no one in the world who knows the secrets of the heavenly court. Yao Meng quickly shook her head again and chuckled, no, maybe the Demon Queen also knows about the heavenly court. Having said that, she didn't care much about the heavenly court. She said lightly, if it's just to satisfy curiosity, it doesn't matter whether this matter is investigated or not. Regardless of whether the heavenly court exists or not, the current rules of heaven and earth enlightenment is allowed. As long as you can attain enlightenment, it doesn't matter whether you are in Juzhu or in the heavenly palace. Compared to this, I have another thing that I care about. Yao Meng's green eyes inadvertently glanced at Wei Mengru, who was silent in the corner, and said with a smile, Miss Wei, do you have a way to let the original witch return to your cauldron? Wei Mengru glanced at Musian, and then replied in a calm tone, sorry, I can't control her spiritual consciousness. Besides, her spiritual consciousness is already in his cauldron, and I can't do anything about it. Musian found that Fairy Yao Meng's pupils suddenly darkened. It seems that she will not leave your Tiansheng furnace before her spiritual consciousness is nurtured. Yao Meng had no expression on her face. The spiritual energy in the Tiansheng furnace is quite special. If she can heal her injuries as soon as possible through my furnace, it would actually be good. And because she is in a deep sleep, it will not affect our daily practice. Musian euphemistically expressed the meaning of our dual cultivation will not be affected. He originally thought that Yao Meng was a mature and considerate cool fairy who didn't like to fight with others, but unexpectedly, she said calmly, actually, you could have refused her at that time and prevented her from entering your natural furnace. That is Musian's natural cauldron. If he is willing, he can use the spiritual energy to seal his own natural cauldron before the original witch enters his cauldron. As a result, now, besides her, there are other spiritual consciousnesses that have also entered Musian's natural furnace. It was as if Musian's natural furnace had become a room that everyone could enter. Musian also complained in his heart, thinking, why all of you turned into a wisp of spiritual consciousness and ran into my innate furnace, what kind of bus am I? Then, he smiled bitterly and said, it was an emergency just now, and I didn't react at all. This time, Yao Meng did not speak again. After all, even she had not expected the actions of the original witch just now. It stands to reason that not everyone's spiritual consciousness can enter Musian's natural furnace, and not many people know the secret of the natural furnace. However, the original witch used to be Musian's Taoist companion, how could she not know this? Regardless, it's too late to say anything now. If a primal witch suddenly appeared while being intimate with Musian later, just thinking about it would make people completely uninterested. The original witch may be sleeping now, but she could wake up occasionally in Musian's natural furnace in the past, and the original witch can naturally do the same. When he thought of this, Yao Meng felt dissatisfied at first, and then, as if he suddenly thought of something interesting, his eyes flickered slightly. After a while, she raised the corners of her mouth in a slight arc. Speaking of which, Jingxi Qinglian can suppress other people's cauldrons. Naturally, the natural cauldron can also be suppressed by Jingxi Qinglian. If the purifying green lotus is used to suppress Musian's natural cauldron during dual cultivation, even if the original witch can know what is happening in the outside world, she will not be able to show it and can only watch. Something interesting seemed to come to mind, and the flawless fairy pursed her lips with a happy arc. Seeing that Yao Meng's mood seemed to be slightly relieved, Musian also took this opportunity to speak at the right time. Sister Fairy, I will be going to participate in today's competition in a while, so I have to prepare in advance and go back first. Room. Yao Meng smiled and nodded, I'll go see your performance later. After bidding farewell to Yao Meng, Musian left Tianhe Garden, sat down in a pavilion in the Liulai Palace, and then breathed a sigh of relief. At this time, the maid sitting not far away suddenly sneered with gloating, even without concealing it. Musian lightly slapped the iceberg beauty's thigh and sighed, Sister Mengru, shouldn't you be making suggestions for your master at this time? Even if it doesn't work, you should also express your sympathy. Immediately, he secretly praised again. Although Sister Mengru's attitude was quite cold, Her skin was still warm and soft. Wei Mengru glanced at him condescendingly, and then at the dog's paw. A trace of shame flashed in her eyes, and she said, "If I remember correctly, your competition should be in Shenchi, so early. What are you doing here? To escape the punishment of that fairy." "Yao Meng is not that kind of person and won't do any punishment." Musian shook his head. He paused and continued, "I'm wondering if it would be too late to meet the Empress of Yuzhou now." The maid next to Luo Tan invited him to meet Luo Tan, but he was kidnapped on the way. If he went to see the other party now, the other party might not accept him. Didn't the Queen of the Demon World say before that she couldn't refine the Tegzapil? Wei Mengru guessed Musian's purpose at a glance. Perhaps she can indeed refine the Tegzapil, but do you think the other party will refine the Tegzapil to someone with the same potential as the Queen of the Demon Realm? There are a total of 9 levels of demon cultivators in this world. Even if any demon cultivator takes the Tegzapil, there will be a qualitative change. And for a demon like Biruoxi who has the potential of the 9th level, if he takes the Tegzapil, there is a high probability that in the future able to be promoted to 9-tailed fox. Musian lay down on the soft flesh of Wei Meng's tender white thigh and fell into deep thought. That's right. Even if you go to see Luo Tan, it's impossible for him to help you. Beings like Spirit Dragon and the Queen of the Demon Realm are all 9th level demon who would refine a Tegzapil to add an existence to Dongzhou that is no less than the Queen of the Demon Realm for no reason? Unless, conditions can be given to make the Empress heart move. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 318. It is almost completely unrealistic for Luo Tan to refine the Tegzapil according to the direct words of the Queen of the Demon Realm. However, there is no deal that cannot be completed in this world. At least in Musian's view, Luo Tan would refuse to refine the Tegzapil because there was simply no interest that could interest her. He can't give this benefit now. Musian insists on saying that there are only 2 most valuable things now. One is the Tianhuan cultivation technique of the first-generation demon emperor. And the other one is himself, or in other words, the physique of a natural furnace. However, before reaching the return to the Void Realm, the help to the Hedeo realm is ultimately limited. Even if Musian's cauldron has been strengthened many times, the God-refining realm is still the God-refining realm, and it is difficult to help the Hedeo realm. As for the spiritual energy given to Yao Meng day and night before, it was actually more of a sentiment between Musian and Yao Meng. It could give Yao Meng's cauldron a certain amount of spiritual energy, but it was very difficult to fill it up. In fact, it is more straightforward to understand the cauldron in the Hedeo realm as a cave sky, and what is in the cauldron cave sky is a sea. It is basically unrealistic to fill an ocean with the spiritual energy of the natural furnace, unless Musian can return to his emptiness or even realize enlightenment. Of course, even so, Musian was still happy and vowed to help Yao Meng until her cauldron was completely filled. Musian stood up and stretched. Although Wei Mengru's knee pillow made people reluctant to leave, the competition at the Immortal Ascension Conference was about to begin, and before that, he still needed to go somewhere. "Sister Mengru, I have to go out, you should go back first." Musian raised his hand and summoned the flying sword, which landed at his feet like a swimming fish. "Where to go?" Wei Mengru looked at Musian doubtfully, with a trace of worry hidden in her eyes. "I have something to ask Pavilion Master Yan." Musian glanced sideways at her and said with a smile, "Come on for today's game, I will leave my future to you." Wei Mengru glanced at the young man with a bright smile. "I will try my best to win the competition, but you have to be more relaxed. You should still remember the losses you suffered at the auction, right? If you hadn't been intimate with multiple girls at that time, what happened later would not have happened. You don't think I will sacrifice my life for Tegzudan?" Musian saw through Wei Mengru's thoughts at a glance. Then, he waved his hand and said, "Even if I want to, others will appreciate it. My natural cauldron in the God-refining realm is of no use to the Hedeo realm." When Wei Mengru heard this, She nodded silently. That's true. Although my young master is a licentious person, the Empress is still in the Hedeo realm. How could she refine elixirs for the sake of the natural cauldron, but I think too much. Library. After asking the disciples near the library pavilion, Muzian learned that Yan Ruyu was entertaining a distinguished guest on the top floor of the library pavilion, so he waited patiently at the door outside the top floor. At this time, Yan Ruyu's clear and melodious voice suddenly came from outside the house. Since you are here, come in. Princess Yongning is not an outsider. Muzian adjusted his collar slightly, then pushed the door open and saw Yan Ruyu, who was writing something with his head down and a pen. The mysterious robe wraps up her sexy body, with fluttering wide sleeves and plump lips. She is between a young girl and a royal sister. She has the white and tender skin of a young girl and the charm of a mature woman. The combination of the two blends pure love. Coquettish charm. Although I should call her master, I always feel that she is more like the big sister next door than master. Although Muzian is not a womanizer, seeing the scene at the moment, he still couldn't help but have some messy thoughts. Not far from Yan Ruyu, there was another woman sitting. Wearing a pale golden dress with a warm snow jacket draped over it, her hair was pulled up with a hosta, setting off her flawless and delicate face. Princess Yongning looked up, then showed a noble and elegant smile. Mr. Mu. Princess Yongning is here too, I won't disturb you, right? Muzian asked with a smile. Yan Ruyu raised her eyes and glanced at him, then chuckled and said, don't be so polite. Yongning is not an outsider. Whatever you do when you are at home, do whatever you want now. No need to be formal. If I were usually at home, I would have hugged Ruoxi for a kiss and a hug by now. Muzian glanced at Yan Ruyu's intellectual, soft, and beautiful face, and then withdrew his gaze without leaving a trace. After all, there are other people watching, and you still have to take your image into consideration. What is Pavilion Master Yan writing? Muzian walked up to Yan Ruyu, pretending to be curious. Letter of recommendation. Princess Yongning smiled and replied on Yan Ruyu's behalf. Although she is less than 23 years old, the eldest princess seems to exude a mature and elegant temperament in every move she makes, which is really eye-catching. Letter of recommendation. There was a hint of doubt in Muzian's eyes. Every sect examination, there will be royal disciples from the Dakian dynasty entering the sect, and these royal disciples can be exempted from the examination. Sister Yan is now recommending a royal disciple, Princess Yongning said with a smile. Muzian looked thoughtful and said nothing, but waited patiently for Yan Ruyu. Then, his eyes intentionally or unintentionally glanced at the eldest princess, who was sitting upright on the chair with a classic and elegant temperament. She was sitting in a dignified posture, with her hands folded on her knees, and her waist was straight, highlighting the perfect curvature of her breasts. Princess Yongning, the person recommended by Pavilion Master Yan should be a close confidant of yours, right? Muzian suddenly sent a message and asked. It was very presumptuous to suddenly use voice transmission to someone who had only met a few times, but Princess Yongning didn't seem to have any disgust. She just glanced at Muzian with a smile and said, Mr. Mu, you should have gotten some information from Miss Manting, right? As expected, this woman has secretly investigated my affairs. Muzian sent a message. As a woman, Princess Yongning, why is she so concerned about Liang Yi's sex affairs? In the past, the third prince stayed in the sect as one of Princess Yongning's informants and reported information to her every once in a while. Later, the third prince was kicked out of the sect and placed in solitary confinement in the dynasty. Princess Yongning probably also investigated later. For various reasons. Princess Yongning smiled lightly and replied, Liangji sect is a place of high status in Dongzhou. There is nothing to do in the palace every day. If you can know some things happening in the outside world, you can at least pass the time. But the girl next to Mr. Mu was really decisive. Ning Long originally thought that he would be free in 3 years, but he didn't expect that he would be imprisoned for 10 years in the end. Musian's eyes moved slightly and asked, who went to the Dacian dynasty later? The saint in the restricted area. The servant she sent said that her young lady was harassed by Ning Long in the sect and was very troubled. After hearing this, my father was extremely angry and imprisoned Ning Long for 10 years. Princess Yongning sent a message. Road. Restricted area. Musian understood something instantly. I didn't expect that Sister Ling Xian, who usually looks innocent and cute, would be so decisive when taking action. Musian said in a message, there are still 2 full years until the next sect assessment. Even with the recommendation letter from Pavilion Master Yan, I'm afraid it's impossible for any royal disciples to set foot there again this year. This time Princess Yongning did not answer, obviously acquiescing. Has Princess Yongning ever considered using an outsider as an informant? Musian said again. This time, Princess Yongning's beautiful red phoenix eyes glanced at Musian slightly. Those pale golden eyes seemed to reveal the wisdom that could see through everything. Her red lips moved slightly, with a faint smile at the corner of her mouth, and she said, the spy Mr. Mu mentioned is I. Princess Yongning narrowed her eyes. Mr. Mu, are you willing to help with this? Young Master Mu probably doesn't have a good impression of the Dacian dynasty, right? Gu boxing had just caused trouble for Musian some time ago, and yesterday, both the Yaokai Holy Land and the restricted area went to the Dacian dynasty. If I remember correctly, there were people in the restricted area and the Yaokai Holy Land who Musian knew. It's hard not to think of something. In short, it stands to reason that Musian today must not have a good impression of the Dacian dynasty. In this case, he is willing to help her? The Dacian dynasty is the Dacian dynasty, and the national preceptor is the national preceptor. Musian smiled and looked at the elegantly sitting woman. And the eldest princess is the woman I have always longed for in my heart. I can provide you with all the information about the Tuyi section. In addition, if you want to do anything in the future, I can also help. The water in the Dacian dynasty is very deep. If you don't have enough background, it may be difficult to show your talents. Miji settled for a moment and gave her a meaningful look, but I can help you behind the scenes as your background. Princess Yongning's eyes flashed with a gleam, and she didn't reply this time. She just lowered her eyes slightly, not knowing what she was thinking. After a while, Yan Ruyu handed the written recommendation letter to Princess Yongning, and the eldest princess smiled and thanked her again, took the recommendation letter with both hands, and looked at Musian deeply. Then he smiled and said, it seems like you two have something else to say, so I won't disturb you. Musian watched Princess Yongning's back disappearing into the tea room, while Yan Ruyu looked at the young man's handsome face and said with a slight smile, everyone has left, don't look at her. Then, she changed her voice and said, what's the reason why you came to me this time? Wait, you have another competition, right? Can't you come and see the pavilion master if you have nothing to do? Musian said with a smile. Yan Ruyu gave Musian a sideways look, but it was full of mature and sexy charm, full of charm. Musian restrained his joking mentality slightly and said, I do have something to ask the pavilion master. In the past, I heard that the national destiny of the Dacian dynasty involved Dongzhou's blessing of monks. Is this true? Musian asked. Yan Ruyu glanced at Musian in surprise, do you even know this? Then, she nodded slightly, the territory of the Dacian dynasty occupies more than half of Dongzhou, and its national fortunes will bless the monks of Dongzhou. It can be said that the national fortunes and the monks of Dongzhou complement each other, not to mention they are very, very important. But at least it's quite helpful for cultivation. However, over the years, the fortune of the Dacian dynasty has gradually declined, and the blessings for the monks in Dongzhou can be said to be minimal. But even so, the sect would not interfere with the affairs of the dynasty under normal circumstances. After all, the rise and fall of dynasties and the change of generations are common. Yan Ruyu spoke again. If the dynasty declines and a new dynasty rises, during this period, The Dongzhou monks will probably not have the blessing of the dynasty Kuyun, Muzian asked. Yan Ruyu nodded slightly. Unless the old emperor gives up his throne and a wise emperor takes over. Yan Ruyu shook her head secretly, but if the Prince of Dagan has to say, he is not particularly suitable for this position. She had met the prince twice in the past. Maybe he was friendly to people, but in terms of ability, he was average. At least she was not very optimistic. Muzian did not speak again this time, but fell into thought. After a while, he spoke to Yan Ruyu again and talked about the Dagan dynasty for a while, then stood up and said goodbye to Yan Ruyu, and flew to the south bank on his sword. The giant spirit hall is located deep in the south bank. There are several caves in this hall, and the Yuzhou Empress who was invited to watch the Ascension Conference before lived here. After finding out where Luo Tan lived, Muzian flew to the giant spirit hall. However, just as he arrived at the door, he saw a maid in a palace skirt standing in front of the gate, smiling and saying, "Mr. Mu, His Majesty Luo Tan is not in the giant spirit hall today. Please go back." "Is this the maid beside Luo Tan?" Muzian walked over calmly and asked, "May I ask who this girl is?" The maid smiled and said, "I am the maid beside His Majesty Luo Tan. If Mr. Mu wants to see His Majesty, please attend the alchemy conference later, and you will be able to see her then." It seems that the other party is not going to see anyone for the time being. Muzian did not entangle, but raised his hand to bow, and then flew away. He is not in a hurry about the matter of Tegzapil for the time being. After all, he now has the magic weapon given by the Queen of the Demon Realm to shield the demonic aura, so he is not worried that Bairuoxi's demonic aura will be exposed. In addition, it is impossible to gather the medicinal materials for Tegzapil in a short time. Compared to this, it is more necessary to worry about his personal safety now. Muzian flew over the sky of the south bank on his sword and headed for the Ascension platform, which is the competition venue of the Ascension Conference. At the same time, he opened his personal interface after a long time and took a look at his current personal interface. Since then, he has achieved more and more achievements, and most of those titles have given him huge bonuses, so that he has created a chaotic body. Even the pink heroine of destiny in the role positioning makes people feel a little sad. Although the heroine is also the protagonist, this is completely different from what I expected at the beginning. Muzian sighed secretly. The most outrageous thing is that there is a small green teacup shape behind the words of the heroine of destiny, and it seems to be steaming faintly. What does the green tea logo behind the role positioning imply? Muzian complained silently in his heart, and then looked at the two very conspicuous titles of Reborn on the personal interface and fell into a brief contemplation. Original Witch, you said that you gave me my personal interface, so the reborn person must be you, right? Muzian suddenly asked tentatively in his heart. According to previous speculation, the reborn person may not only be the original witch, but also the second reborn person. However, through his contact with several protagonists around him, he did not feel that they had any reaction that the reborn person should have. It stands to reason that if it is a reborn person, the feelings towards him should be more enthusiastic, but whether it is Bairuoxi, Ya Lingxian or that senior sister, the attitude is no different from before. The original witch did not answer, thinking that she should still be asleep, so Muzian did not disturb her again. There were cultivators everywhere near the Ascension platform, and the noisy sound spread from the ground to the air. Muzian arrived at the destination unknowingly. He slightly restrained his thoughts and fell lightly from the air. Soon, his eyes fell on a martial arts arena not far away. In front of the arena was a cold woman wearing a moon-white dress, as if accompanied by the moonlight. Almost the entire audience seemed to focus on her, but the cold Lan Mulian seemed not to notice, looking at the opponent in front of her with a calm face. Lan Mulian's breath was not disordered at all, while her opponent's aura was already disordered at this moment. She covered her chest and gasped, staring at the beauty in the white dress in front of her. In the past, She had never really seen Lan Mulian take action, and now Muzian just stood in the audience and watched this scene, and felt great psychological pressure, let alone her opponent. Senior sister really crushed the opponent in terms of temperament and strength. This kind of woman is not easy to control, Muzian secretly admired in his heart. Just imagine, if one day when you are in a double cultivation with her, senior sister still looks at you with a cold expression, with a cold attitude of "that's it? Did you really come in?" Just thinking about it makes me feel hurt. Of course, if you can see such a cold woman showing a charming expression on her face, it will also give you a great sense of satisfaction. Just looking up at the high platform, admiring Lan Murian's graceful figure, at this time, a charming and soft sweet voice suddenly came from behind Muzian. "Is my sister so beautiful? Look, you are almost drooling from staring at her." Muzian did not look back, staring at the white-dressed beauty in the air who crushed her opponent with an invincible posture, and said, "Your sister has a good figure and is very beautiful." One hand was placed on Lan Feiying's waist, and he looked at her sideways and smiled, but Sister Feiying is no less than senior sister. The tall and charming beauty was wearing a black cheongsam today, which outlined her sexy and tight perfect figure. She was wearing a pair of exquisite embroidered shoes under her feet. Her eyes were seductive. She gave Muzian an angry look and said, "Little pervert, this is not the case here. If I tell my sister what you are doing here, you will be dead. Then I can only feel good before I die." Muzian made a fierce look and patted her butt gently. Lan Feiying patted Muzian's dog paw away, glanced at him, and said with a smile, "You look quite relaxed, are you confident? Even if you don't have confidence, it's useless to be nervous now, right? Cultivation can't be improved in a short time," Muzian said with a smile. "You are quite open-minded." Lan Feiying chuckled, and then took a look at another competition platform not far away. In front of the competition stage is a young man wearing a black robe. He looks thin and not as handsome as Muzian, but he is still handsome, with a pair of dark eyes showing a proud look. The sword in his hand pointed at the opposite opponent. "Yeah, you, the third level of God refining." Lan Feiying was about to quietly look away, but at this time, Muzian also looked up. After looking at it for a few times, he sincerely praised, "He is practicing really fast, almost as fast as caught up with me." Seeing that Muzian didn't seem to be hit, Lan Feiying felt a little relieved. She narrowed her eyes and smiled and said, "You don't have to belittle yourself. Fast practice does not mean that you are stronger than your opponent. If there is a difference of 1 or 2 levels, it can be made up for with combat experience and foundation. Sister Feiying is so kind. She also comforts me." "Sure enough, I didn't see the wrong person before," Muzian said touchedly. Lan Feiying gave him a big look and said, "I know how to say things to make girls happy." Although he said this, the corners of his mouth still curved slightly in a charming way. Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to inform us. We will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding. Sometimes women are like this. Even if they know that what you say is flattering, knowing it in their heart does not mean that they will not be happy or have a good impression. The so-called strategy is subtle. As long as the relationship is in place, even if they don't confess, they will basically be together by default with a hand-in-hand or a physical movement. The relationship between Muzian and Lan Feiying has not reached that level, but it is far more ambiguous than the relationship between friends. While the two were chatting, an uproar suddenly broke out in the audience. Muzian looked around and saw that the battle over Lan Mulian had reached its end. Her opponent was Yunzhou's Tianzi, and it was obvious that she was also fighting at this moment. Being forced into a corner, he had no choice but to use his trump card. At this moment, a huge cave sky was gradually formed with the Yunzhou Saint as the center. There was a piece of snow in the cave sky, as if Lan Mulian was being dragged into it. "Gi Holy Land, if I remember correctly, this should be the secret technique of the cave. People locked in this cave will have their senses completely deprived. It is a secret technique that is quite troublesome even for those who are in the realm of returning to the void. If senior sister Lan is taken into that holy land, I'm afraid she will be in trouble. But we can also see her true strength. She obviously held back just now. There were whispers of discussion from the audience. Musian glanced at Lan Fading, but saw that this charming beauty still had a calm expression, quietly raising her head and staring at the cold woman on the stage. You have great confidence in senior sister, Musian said. After all, she is the #1 genius in the section. Even in this Immortal Ascension conference, no one has ever caught up with her. Lan Fading chuckled softly, looked at Lan Mulian, and said softly. She didn't even warm up. The two sisters seemed to have a telepathic connection. Just when the cave was about to completely envelop the entire immortal platform, Lan Mulian slowly raised his head and looked at the ice and snow in front of him. The moon-white dress was blown close to her delicate body by the cold wind. She raised her hand, and there was a clear and sweet snap of her fingers. Boom! The entire ground seemed to be shaking, and the violent shaking caused the dark clouds to collapse. The Gi Holy Land that was supposed to cover the entire competition stage disintegrated silently before it even touched Lan Mulian's toes. The holy body of destiny can spy on the origin of all things. No matter how weird the secret method is, it is impossible to get close to her. Lan Fading turned to look at Musian with a smile. Isn't it awesome? Musian stared at the scene and nodded slightly. It was indeed very strong. He had never felt such a strong sense of oppression in the same realm. He also has the pseudo-physique of the holy body of destiny, but he can only use this physique to speed up his cultivation, but it is still difficult to spy on all things. I think that is the way Lan Mulian understood in the Return to the Void realm. Difficult for others to imitate. At this time, Lan Fading raised her head and glanced at the competition stage in the distance, and said with a smile, "It's almost my competition, I'm leaving first, little guy." As Xiang Feng left the table, Lan Fading's graceful figure slowly disappeared from sight. Musian withdrew his gaze and looked up at Lan Mulian, who had just won. At this moment, the senior sister was surrounded by a group of disciples like stars holding the moon. She always had a slight smile on her face, even though she was covered. The veil adds a bit of mysterious hazy beauty. As if aware of Musian's gaze, Lan Mulian raised his head, and their eyes met. Senior sister's performance today is really impressive, Musian praised in a voice message. Lan Mulian glanced at him, raised her eyebrows slightly, and said through a message, "If you can't even solve the God-refining realm, I don't have to participate in this Immortal Ascension conference." The words are full of confidence and arrogance in oneself. "Sister, do you still remember the letter I wrote last night?" Musian boldly asked. When Lan Mulian heard this, there was a trace of hesitation in his eyes, and then he sent a message, "If you can enter the top 10 of the Immortal Ascension Conference, you can make a wish to me, as long as it is not too excessive." How should I call it too much? Musian really wanted to ask this, but in the end he held back and said via voice message, "Okay, I will try my best to enter the top 10 of the Immortal Ascension Conference." Watching Lan Mulian turn around and disappear gradually after talking to everyone, Musian retracted his gaze and was about to leave. Just then, out of the corner of his eye, he caught sight of the man who had just come down from the high platform not far away. "Yeah, you." Probably because he had just defeated his opponent, he looked high-spirited. When he came off the stage, his eyes fell on Musian and said lightly, "Are you still only a 4th-level God Refiner? I hope you won't be killed today." Eliminated, otherwise it would be a shame for Pavilion Master Yan. Yayu has now entered the 3rd level of God Refining, while Musian is still at the beginning of the 4th level of God Refining. If things go on like this, it won't be long before he can truly surpass Musian, and even in this Immortal Ascension Conference General Musian was completely defeated. Musian naturally laughed at Yayu's ridicule, but when he left, he inadvertently glanced at Yayu one more time. The aura in Yayu seemed to have changed a lot. He always felt that the aura in Yayu had been felt somewhere before. The energy of heaven. After a while, Musian suddenly realized, with a bit of surprise in his eyes. Yes, the spiritual energy in Yayu's body seems to contain the breath of heaven. He seemed to have performed many sect tasks before. Did he get any opportunity while performing sect tasks? When Musian thought of this, his eyes became more thoughtful. Brother Mu, are you okay? Did he just say something to you? At this time, a clear and sweet girl's voice suddenly came from not far away, which also brought Musian back to reality from his previous thoughts. In the 12th lunar month of winter, Ye Lingxian, who was wearing a purple skirt and a light pink jacket, came to him at some unknown time. Compared with the past, her mind today is not to say great, but in fact it is already somewhat large, but compared with her sister Yechian, it is a sad story. However, that pretty and beautiful face can cover up some minor regrets in the development of her breasts. Musian glanced at Ye Lingxian, shook his head and smiled, "It's okay, I'm just a little bit shocked. My cultivation progress is really slow," he sighed softly. Ye Lingxian glanced at him, grabbed Musian's palm with a slightly cold hand, raised her head and smiled lightly, "It's okay, didn't Lingxian tell Brother Mu before? I will protect Brother Mu from now on. So, don't worry about the outside world. Or if Brother Mu gets tired of it, we can go back to the restricted area together." Before Ye Lingxian finished speaking, Musian raised his hand and gently stroked Ye Lingxian's head, then hugged her into his arms. The girl's delicate body is soft and beautiful, and her body is filled with the unique fragrance of roses. Just closing your eyes slightly makes people feel like they can't help but be immersed in it. Ye Lingxian also closed her eyes slightly, put her hands on his shoulders, and leaned her face against Musian's arms, seeming to enjoy the warmth. After a while, she gently broke away from Musian's arms. "What's wrong?" Musian looked at Ye Lingxian in confusion. "Brother Mu, remember to cover up your scent next time." Ye Lingxian carefully arranged Musian's clothes, raised her head, stared into his eyes with bright eyes, and said with a smile, "Even if there is a trace of other people's aura, the innate spirit will tell me." Although he was smiling, there seemed to be no warmth in his eyes. But fortunately, this is the immortal platform, and even Ye Lingxian will not do anything too outrageous. For her, what is more important right now is the Immortal Ascension Conference, or, in other words, the prizes from the Immortal Ascension Conference. This Immortal Ascension Conference itself is also a battle for the Holy Cauldron. Whoever wins in the end will have the right to speak. What's more, for the saint in the restricted area, she doesn't think she will lose to others. She has wanted to have a friendly discussion with Bairuoxi and others a long time ago. Raising her head and glancing at the competition stage in the distance, Ye Lingxian continued with a smile, "It seems it's almost my turn. I'll go over first, and then I'll find you." Sister Lingxian is usually cute, but it is really dangerous when she is angry, especially when the lock of desolate time was still in her sleeve just now. Musian silently looked at Ye Lingxian's slender back until it disappeared, and then took it back look. Then, he lowered his head and smelled the fragrance on his body. "It seems that I have to find a way to eliminate the smell later. However, we should consider these things later. What is more important right now is today's competition." Of course, that being said, as long as he doesn't run into Bairuoxi and the others, Musian is still confident that he can fight with them. When Musian was preparing for today's competition, at this moment, in front of a remote high platform, a woman in a luxurious white dress was leaning on a chair, quietly staring at the competition platform where Musian was. She was wearing knee-high snow-white boots, black silk wrapped around her beautiful legs, and glanced at the fairy in green skirt who appeared not far from her side without saying anything, and smiled faintly. In the past, it was rare to see fairies in the Yaokai Holy Land care so much about a disciple. Yao Meng glanced at Luo Tan with her beautiful green eyes and smiled. After all, no matter what, he is someone I taught personally, so naturally I want to see the results of my teaching. Both of them deliberately restrained their breath, so not many people noticed that the two great masters of the Hedeo realm were actually sitting in front of a relatively remote high platform chatting and laughing. Fairy Yao Meng, what do you think the young cultivator you taught can achieve? Luo Tan suddenly asked casually. Top 10, or top 5, Yao Meng said. This Ascension conference is very valuable. According to everyone's original expectations, to be able to enter the top 10 or top 5, at least one must be at least the 7th level of the spirit refining to be eligible. As a result, Fairy Yao Meng said that a young cultivator of the 4th level of the spirit refining can also enter the top 10. Should I say that this fairy has confidence in her own teaching, or in Musian? Luo Tan's eyes were filled with a faint smile, and he looked up and said, Fairy Yao Meng is really confident. Of course. Yao Meng narrowed her beautiful eyes, looked up and stared at the direction of Musian, and smiled lightly. After all, he is the person I chose. The Empress of Yuzhou narrowed her eyes slightly, and couldn't help but take a deep look at this fairy-like beauty in a green skirt. Just as Musian expected, except for a few destiny protagonists, although other geniuses have good talents, he is not weaker than anyone in terms of strength. After 100 moves, he successfully cut down his opponent. The night fell silently, and the sky showed a dark blue color. After Musian returned to Tianhe Garden, he immediately began to meditate. Today he consumed a lot of spiritual energy. If he wanted to replenish it, the fastest way was to extract the spiritual energy between heaven and earth for his own use. Just when Musian closed his eyes and began to meditate, he did not notice that a green figure quietly appeared in the room. He is meditating so early. Yao Meng's green eyes looked up and down at Musian, and seemed a little surprised. But soon, she retracted her gaze. Well, let him practice with peace of mind today. When she thought of this, Yao Meng was about to turn around and leave the room, but at this moment, she suddenly heard a soft and pleasant voice in her ear. Give up. From today on, I will never let you contact him again as long as I am here. Yao Meng was about to leave when she stopped abruptly. She turned her head slightly and looked over. The pair of green eyes seemed to penetrate Musian's body and reach a certain spiritual consciousness in his natural furnace. Original witch. Yao Meng narrowed her eyes and stared at her and said, Are you not sleeping? The spiritual energy in the natural furnace is too wonderful, so I want to enjoy it for a while. The soft and pleasant voice of the original witch came softly in Yao Meng's ears. But I'm afraid you won't experience it again in the future. A trace of deep color flashed across the eyes of the cold and elegant fairy. You mean? I said, he is my Taoist partner, so of course no one else can have close contact with him. The original witch paused. Oh, if it's according to what you mean, you came first in this life, so you are his Taoist partner, right? Then. The original witch suddenly smiled. The spiritual energy in your Taoist partner's cauldron is really great. She deliberately imitated Yao Meng's words during the day, her tone full of sarcasm. The moment these words fell, the temperature of the whole room suddenly dropped. Yao Meng narrowed her eyes and stared at the spiritual consciousness of the silver-haired beauty in Musian's body. The original witch's expression was still indifferent, with a sweet smile on her face, as if the winner was looking down at the loser, her eyes full of contempt. Then, she ignored the loser and retracted her gaze. No matter how angry you are now, what can you do? Now I am in his natural furnace, what can you do? I can only be helpless and furious outside, looking at the sweet spiritual energy in the natural furnace but having no way to do anything. When she thought of this, the original witch suddenly felt that she could understand Fairy Yao Meng. This feeling of being a green man is really great. Seeing that Yao Meng still had no intention of leaving, the original witch looked at Yao Meng again through the natural furnace, and was about to speak. However, at this moment, she suddenly seemed to notice something, and her eyes widened a little. Pure World Blue Lotus. What do you want to do? Yao Meng did not speak, but raised her palm and gently threw the ordinary-looking blue lotus. You. Before the original witch finished her words, the next moment, the light of the pure world blue lotus quietly enveloped the entire room, and even completely sealed Musian's cauldron. Yao Meng looked at the scene with a smile on his face, and there was a faint smile in his eyes. The voice of the original witch was completely silent, and the aura could not be absorbed, which made Musian subconsciously open his eyes. When he saw the beauty wearing a blue fairy dress appearing in his field of vision, he was surprised and said, "Yao Meng, why are you here? What's the matter?" Yao Meng's beautiful eyes narrowed and she glanced at Musian's body inadvertently, as if through his body he could reach a certain direction of the cauldron. Then, her soft and melodious voice sounded in the room, as holy as the sound of nature, but also full of sultry tenderness. "Can't I come to you if nothing happens?" Even though he didn't have any special thoughts at first, seeing this fairy who was pure and lusty, Musian felt hot in his heart. But he still suppressed his inner impulse and said reservedly, "Sister Fairy, I have lost a lot of spiritual energy today, so I have to practice first. This is a job, and I have to finish the work." Normally, he would probably just enjoy the beauty of having a beautiful woman in his arms without saying a word, but now the original witch is still in the natural furnace. Although the other party may be sleeping now, Musian still wants to be safe for a few days. "Say it again." Yao Meng's red lips pursed slightly, and she came to the bed lightly, placing a hand on the back of Musian's hand. Then, she raised her eyes, raised the corner of her mouth with an elegant arc, and stared at it. "It doesn't matter, just do half of it." Musian was stunned. "What's half done?" Under Musian's gaze, she raised her slender fingers and gently hooked Musian's neck, her pink lips slowly coming closer, but her beautiful eyes that used to be cold were full of seductive charm. Under Musian's eyes that seemed to be getting increasingly fiery, the soft lips deliberately stopped when they were about to approach Musian's lips. Then, a subtle and soft voice stirred up Musian's mind, and said quietly, "Half of it is cultivation, and half of it is other things." So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 319. To put it bluntly, the so-called half-doing is to practice only half, and being intimate is also half. Although Musian originally planned to practice with peace of mind, however, Yao Meng hooked his hands around Musian's neck, and his rosy lips touched his lips lightly, and the sweet fragrance exhaled had a charm that attracted people's attention. "I still have my competition tomorrow, I have to adjust my state to the best state as soon as possible." Musian expressed his refusal tactfully. The reason was not for the competition, but he was not sure whether the original witch was asleep. If the original witch woke up when he and Yao Meng were intimate. "The spiritual energy in my cauldron is greatly lacking, and it was lost a lot last time I went to the Dogon dynasty. I need to practice with you to make up for it." Yao Meng lowered his eyes slightly, looking a little reserved, and said softly, "As for your desire to adjust your state, my natural Taoist fetus can not only allow your first-grade skills to gradually complete the evolution, but also recuperate." Inside the house, the candlelight flickered. Musian looked down at the fairy in front of him. Even if she had acted indifferent in the eyes of the world in the past, she still blushed a little at this moment. She turned her head slightly, and her crystal earlobes were stained with a faint blush, which was very tempting. Come to think of it, dual cultivation is also a way of cultivation. What's more, Yao Meng is a natural Taoist fetus. This is just for cultivation. Musian's eyes became more and more scorching. Finally, he couldn't bear it anymore and lowered his head. He kissed Yao Meng's flawless cheek, and then moved slowly down along her cheek to touch her lips. Almost at that moment, the pure world green lotus in Musian's body burst out with a green brilliance in an instant. Green Emperor. The voice of the original witch sounded in the depths of the natural furnace, but it was immediately covered by the pure world green lotus. Slowly, she felt that the spiritual energy in the natural furnace seemed to be quietly fading away. Although she didn't know what happened, the fact that the spiritual energy of the natural furnace would fade away could only mean one thing. Musian's spiritual energy was being absorbed by someone. The spiritual energy in the Tiansheng furnace cauldron cannot be actively controlled even by Musian herself, but requires the initiative of others. In other words, the Qing Emperor gave her Taoist partner to her in front of her. Thinking of the various scenes that might happen in the house at this moment, the original witch narrowed her silver eyes, and the silver hair behind her slowly rose like floating in the sea. Boom! The spiritual consciousness in the Tiansheng furnace cauldron lit up a silver glow, as if it was going to break the pure world green lotus. However, at this moment, a spiritual energy that did not belong to Musian suddenly injected into the Tiansheng furnace cauldron, and the huge spiritual energy made the original witch's body soften involuntarily. The next moment, this spiritual energy that did not belong to Musian filled the Tiansheng furnace cauldron, and it was so warm that people could not help but feel sleepy. This is Yao Meng's spiritual energy. As Yao Meng said before, she was a natural Taoist fetus. Although she could not passively practice dual cultivation, she could actively feed back the spiritual energy to the Tiansheng furnace cauldron. At this moment, this rich spiritual energy is actually nourishing the spiritual consciousness of the original witch. Musian also noticed this, and lowered his head to gaze at the beauty in his arms. The flickering candlelight reflected her drunken face. Yao Meng did not resist, but she did not take the initiative. However, from her increasingly rosy and charming look, and the voice she suppressed by biting her lips, although Musian was only refining the spirit, he had already suppressed the Dao, and even Yao Meng could not resist it. She slowly opened her bright green eyes, with a faint blush on her cold face. Her eyes were moist, and she looked at the beams of the ceiling in a daze. The process of cultivation was boring and uninteresting. By midnight, Musian had completely made up for the spiritual energy he consumed today, and he looked vigorous. Then, he looked up at Yao Meng beside him. She was covered with a quilt, hiding her graceful figure. Her long black hair was scattered on her back, a little messy, but her face had returned to its former coldness. This posture was enough to make people who saw her feel inferior. If he hadn't seen Yao Meng's charming posture in the past, Musian himself would find it difficult to imagine what kind of appearance this fairy would show in bed. Musian sighed with satisfaction in his heart, feeling refreshed. But at the same time, he was still a little worried. Although it was cool and the spiritual energy was recovered, I just bullied Yao Meng so much. If the original witch was really still awake, she would probably be angry. However, the original witch never showed up from beginning to end, so I think she must be really asleep. If the original witch is not asleep, I will save it in advance, Musian thought to himself. You will have a competition tomorrow, but I think you should be confident, right? Yao Meng suddenly asked softly. She rested her head on Musian's arm as a pillow, her face was still slightly flushed, and there was a hint of charm in her clear eyes. With your help tonight, I am naturally confident. Musian looked at her gently and said sincerely. Under normal circumstances, after a competition in the Ascension Conference, if the opponent is weaker, a lot of spiritual energy will be consumed, and it will be quickly recovered. But if there is a big battle, it is unlikely to completely recover in just one night. After all, the cauldron of the refining God realm is much larger than that of the refining essence and refining Qi realm. In this case, what a cultivator can do is to adjust the body's condition to the best possible, or take elixirs. Among his peers, there is probably no other person like Musian who directly asked the great power of the Hedao realm to help adjust the condition, or even suppress the great power of the Hedao realm with his hands, probably in the whole Jizhu. Musian hugged Yao Meng's smooth and soft body, and slept with her in the warm quilt with peace of mind. After nearly half an hour of teasing and tenderness, Yao Meng stopped disturbing him. She lifted the quilt, her black hair scattered on her back, and her hair naturally fell to her calves and bent slightly, leaving only a beautiful back. Yao Meng looked at her slightly sideways, with affectionate eyebrows and a smile on her lips. "I won't disturb you tonight, you can practice with peace of mind." "Is the fairy leaving?" Musian asked. "I can't step into your natural furnace for the time being, and I'm going to take this opportunity to see what's going on with Yao Yu," Yao Meng said with a smile. "After all, she is the saint of my Yaokai holy land." Musian nodded slightly, looking at Yao Meng's departing figure, and hesitated slightly. He wanted to ask Yao Meng if there were any extra nirvana silks in Yaokai holy land, but he finally held back. "Although I don't mind being a gigolo, I always feel a little embarrassed to ask Yao Meng to ask Yaokai for this. We can trade with the saint of Yaokai later." Thinking of this, Musian silently closed his eyes, held his breath, and began to let the spiritual energy circulate in his body. At the same time, the four characters of Tianhuang Gongfa gradually emerged in his mind. Although he might not have time to master this level of Gongfa during the Ascension Conference, if he could comprehend a little bit, it would become a great trump card in the Ascension Conference afterwards. His Lone Star Sword itself is a pinnacle of concentration, and the spiritual energy is completely injected into the sword. After one sword, he can hurt the enemy 10,000 and hurt himself 8,000. If he could master the Heavenly Phoenix art, he would be able to burn his own furnace when the spiritual energy was absorbed by the Lone Star Sword, allowing the spiritual energy to be reborn. However, the difficulty of practicing the Heavenly Phoenix art was extremely high. Musian was already a genius in Dongzhou, but it was still difficult to peek into its threshold. At this moment, Musian seemed to see a white world in his mind. This was the meditation training of the Heavenly Phoenix art. Although no one taught him, Musian knew that if he could walk out of this white world, he might be able to peek into a corner of the Heavenly Phoenix art. However, no matter how he walked, it was always white all around, and he couldn't see his 5 fingers when he stretched out his hand, because this world was too dazzling, so dazzling that it was difficult for people to open their eyes. After groping in this huge world for nearly half an hour, Musian opened his eyes somewhat disheartened, took out the ring left by the first generation of Demon King from the storage ring, and fell into deep thought. Speaking of which, the Heavenly Phoenix art was obtained by the first generation of Demon Emperors from the heavens, and the first generation of Demon Emperors had already practiced this art to perfection. Logically, there should be no need to keep this art specially. Musian gently grasped the ring, his eyes flickered slightly, and whispered to himself, "Maybe it's not that there is something wrong with my practice of the Heavenly Phoenix art, but that this art itself has a threshold for practice, and I haven't reached it yet. Or, the problem lies in this ring. Maybe it is necessary to use it to learn the Heavenly Phoenix art." Musian had felt several times before that he was about to step into the threshold of the Heavenly Phoenix art, but he was always a little short, and that distance seemed close, but in fact it was extremely far away. Just like the pioneer and the opener, the pioneer is great because the passage he took was the first time. Of course, the opener is also great, because he can expand the road taken by the pioneer to a wider distance, and even walk into the end that the pioneer has never reached. Musian was facing such a situation at the moment. The entrance to the Tianhuang technique was within reach, but it was just a little short. He could reach that little bit, but he couldn't find a way now. Maybe it wasn't my practice that was wrong, but I was missing something crucial? Musian looked at the ring in his hand and fell into deep thought. But I had checked the cave of the pilgrimage temple inside and out before. The only thing left by the first generation of Demon Emperor should be this ring. Musian pondered for a long time, got up and changed his robe, came to the study, picked up a pen and wrote a letter. This letter was one of Lan Murian's magic weapons. After folding it into a paper crane, it could automatically fly to a certain coordinate that had been locked. After Musian released the paper crane, he looked up at the paper crane that gradually disappeared at the end of his vision, then retracted his gaze and turned his head to ask, "Sister Mengru, do you have ointment?" He didn't even need to be born with a spirit body to know that Wei Mengru was by his side. The proud maid in yellow gradually appeared in Musian's sight. She looked at her young master with a hint of doubt in her eyes. "What do you want the ointment for?" "I want to apply some ointment occasionally to dress myself up." Musian smiled brightly. Unexpectedly, Wei Mengru glanced at the young master with a cold look. "You just want to cover up the scent of the Green Emperor on your body? Are you going to go out to find someone? She is worthy of being Sister Mengru. She knows what I am thinking as soon as I ask her a question." Musian nodded slightly and said with a smile, "I remember you also have the habit of applying perfume cream occasionally." Wei Mengru glanced at the young master coldly. "You came to me because it is inconvenient to ask other women for it, and you are worried that they will be jealous." Musian did not deny it and nodded slightly. Not to mention others, if she went to Byruoxi to ask for perfume cream, she would probably immediately notice that Musian was mixed with Yao Meng's unique body fragrance. If she knew that Mu Lang and Qingdi were secretly having an affair, let alone perfume cream, Musian might not even see the sun tomorrow, and forget about participating in the Ascension Conference. Tie Musian back to the Sword Palace overnight. As for Ye Lingxian, she was just caught by her today, but Lingxian probably didn't expect that Musian had even done the last step with other people. Although the girl had had physical contact with Musian, it was only once after all. After all, she was still a pure little beauty. She didn't expect that her brother Mu would be so fickle. And Ye Qian, she probably understood brother Mu, but Ye Qian couldn't keep secrets in her heart, and it was very likely that Ye Lingxian would notice something unusual. After all, the only person around her who could share such a secret was Sister Mengru. Looking at Musian's slightly apologetic look, Wei Mengru finally sighed softly. "Wait for me here for a while." "Sister Mengru is so nice." Musian breathed a sigh of relief. However, Wei Mengru did not leave immediately, but walked in front of him under Musian's gaze. "What's wrong?" Musian asked. Even though Musian has entered the sage mode now, looking at the hot and sexy figure of the maid, he still couldn't help but feel a little moved. Her long hair was scattered like a waterfall, her goose yellow dress outlined a charming curve, and she was wearing a pair of delicate and small embroidered shoes. Her skirt showed a pair of slender legs, and her cold demeanor added a bit of charm to her. Wei Mengru ignored Musian's eyes that were focused on her. She leaned down slightly and gently put her red lips to his ear. "You don't really think it's okay to find me, do you?" Musian subconsciously looked up at her. Wei Mengru's eyes showed a hint of displeasure, and she whispered, "Even I would be jealous." Before Musian could react, Xiangfeng left the table, and Wei Mengru appeared in front of the door like a ghost. She pushed the door open without looking back, leaving only a cold and faint voice floating in the room. "Don't do it again next time." With Wei Mengru's departure, Musian finally woke up from his sudden realization. "It seems that I'll have to go down the mountain to Tianqian City to buy 2 boxes of perfume next time," Musian thought to himself. In the past, a maid was just a maid, but now Wei Mengru is more than just a maid. After waiting in the study for a while, Musian saw Wei Mengru throw a box of pink perfume to him. Then, he turned around and planned to leave. But before leaving, she suddenly hesitated and glanced at the boy in the room. "Where are you going later? Do you need me to follow you?" Musian shook his head. "Sister Mengru, just sit here and meditate and practice. I don't plan to leave the sect, but I want to ask my senior sister some questions." Among the people he knows, the only one who understands the Tianhuang Gongfa is probably the Queen of the Demon Realm. But he and the Queen of the Demon Realm are in a superior subordinate relationship. He had just sought her help before, and this time he called her for a private matter, which was a bit too rude, and might even cause the queen's disgust. Excluding the queen of the demon realm, the other person who can be found is Lan Murian. The heavenly fate holy body can see through the origin of all things, including the techniques and thunder tribulations. In the past, Lan Murian was able to suppress the thunder tribulations several times in a row and break through the spirit refining realm at once, which was due to the existence of this special physique. If it was her, she might be able to see through the secrets of the heavenly phoenix technique. After waiting for nearly half a quarter of an hour, Musian saw the paper crane flying from the window. He opened it and took a look, and as expected, he saw the other party's reply of agreement. There were only two simple words on the letter paper. Okay. Lianji Peak. When Musian came to the outside of Lianji Peak, he saw a tall and cold beauty standing in the air not far away, with a white skirt fluttering and black hair scattered on her back, slightly messy with the cold wind. The moon-white long skirt set off a very well-proportioned figure. Unlike Biruoxi, Lan Murian was not that kind of weak and cold, but a bit like a beauty in the gym, with white and tight skin. Even Musian couldn't help but secretly admire Lan Murian's beauty when he saw this scene. Perhaps because it was late at night, she didn't wear a veil, her hair fluttered in the cold wind, and her delicate and flawless face was set off. She raised her head and smiled. You still have time to come to me, it seems that I am quite free today. Why does this sound like a yin and yang? Musian pretended not to notice, and smiled. I have been practicing hard these days, otherwise it would be impossible to refine the fourth level of the spirit so quickly. As he said, he sighed again. It's a pity that I was punished by the thunder tribulation in the martial world, otherwise I might be able to be promoted to the fifth level of the spirit during the Ascension Conference. The cold wind blew Lan Murian's dress tightly against her exquisite and protruding figure. Looking at Musian's dim eyes, Lan Murian's cold eyes swept across a trace of pity, and said, "Come in first." Even though he knew that Musian was playing a pity game, his emotions still won over his rationality. The snow that had fallen for a few days had stopped tonight, but the biting cold wind made his head swell. Musian flew behind him on his sword, looking at the cold beauty walking in the air not far ahead. He took off his coat, flew over on his sword, and put it on Lan Murian's shoulders. The sudden warmth made Lan Murian's body stiffen slightly. She subconsciously pressed her slender hand on the coat on her shoulder, glanced at Musian who was wearing thin clothes behind her, and said, "I'm not afraid of the cold, Pastor brother, take it back." As he spoke, he wanted to pull off the coat. But at this time, Musian put one hand on the back of Lan Murian's hand, and the slightly cool and soft back of the hand brought a wonderful touch. He looked up at the beautiful senior sister in the eyes of countless sect disciples, and said softly, "There is nothing I can do for you. Cultivators are not afraid of the cold, but at least it represents my thoughts. After the refining spirit realm, cultivators will not be afraid of the cold, but this coat can warm not the body, but the heart." Lan Murian looked at Musian with a faint smile. "How many women have you used this trick to seduce before? Also, remember to remove the fragrance of women before you say this." Her tone was cold and unkind. Fragrance. Musian was puzzled, looking at Lan Murian's beautiful eyes as clear as a cold pond, and he suddenly realized and took out a box of ointment from the ring. "Is this the fragrance you are talking about?" Lan Murian narrowed her eyes. "This is. I got the ointment by chance a few days ago. I thought I had to prepare a little when I came to see my senior sister," Musian said. Then, he handed the ointment to Lan Murian. "Although I have used some, if you don't mind, please accept it, senior sister. Maybe it is of no use for cultivation, but it can increase the charm of women." Lan Murian's eyes flickered slightly, and she glanced at Musian, and finally took the ointment. Looking at this scene, Musian felt relieved. When he first met Lan Murian, he felt that her attitude was a little strange. At first, he thought it was because he had been writing to her less frequently recently, but it turned out to be because of the ointment. This woman seems cold as ice, but in fact she has a strong possessiveness. She is the type of domineering female president. If the window paper between the two parties had not been broken, she might have been controlled to death. In any case, with the previous two preparations, Lan Mulian's attitude towards Musian was obviously much friendly, and the two of them came to a villa unknowingly. The decoration in the villa looked classical and elegant. At Lan Mulian's suggestion, Musian sat on a chair beside the table, then looked around and said, "It's quiet and peaceful here, but wouldn't it be too quiet for senior sister to live here alone?" Lan Mulian put the ointment into the ring and smiled faintly. "Fei Ying comes here occasionally, and master also often brings a chessboard to play chess with me. Also, you often rode here before," Lan Mulian continued. That look seemed to be a little more cold. Obviously, although this arrogant senior sister had never expressed dissatisfaction with Musian's coldness during this period, a word or a gesture revealed this information all the time. "Sorry, but too many things have happened recently, and the Ascension Conference is of great importance, so I naturally want to improve my own strength." Musian paused and sighed. "After this Ascension Conference, I will probably be free." Lan Murian had a blank expression. "You came to me today, is it also about the Ascension Conference?" Musian shook his head and said, "It's also because I haven't seen my senior sister for a long time." When he said the last word, he looked up at the senior sister, who was wearing a moon-white long skirt and had breasts big enough to be placed on the table. This time Musian seemed very sincere. After seeing Lan Murian today, he missed this senior sister a little. He came to see her today, and he also wanted to have a good exchange with her. Lan Murian sneered, "You only think of me at times like this." Senior sister seems to be jealous. Should I be relieved? Musian looked at Lan Murian in surprise, and then immediately said, "There won't be much to do after the Ascension Conference, and I can keep communicating with senior sister through paper cranes. I swear that I will do anything for senior sister in the future. Even if I become a licking dog, it doesn't matter." Lan Murian's expression seemed to ease a little, and she nodded slightly. Then, as if she felt Musian's eyes, she said calmly, "Paper crane communication is secondary. Compared to this, I have already considered the things you mentioned in the letter just now." Senior sister's way of changing the subject is so abrupt. Musian saw through it but didn't say it, and listened to her quietly. It stands to reason that the first-generation Demon King shouldn't have considered passing down the heavenly phoenix art to the next generation. Lan Murian's cold eyes met Musian's. "After all, it's strange that you got the ring he left behind. If I were him, you wouldn't even see the ring, I would destroy it directly." Musian nodded silently. "Senior sister and I really have the same thoughts. She is worthy of being my wife. Why did the first-generation Demon King leave behind the ring that preserved the heavenly phoenix art? The first-generation Demon King has completely mastered the heavenly phoenix art. If it is destroyed, wouldn't the first-generation Demon King be the only one who masters this art in the world? As a being in the Hedeo realm, it is very difficult to die as long as he doesn't commit suicide, not to mention that he is a 9-life heavenly phoenix. In this case, what is the purpose of keeping this art?" "Let me see the ring," Lan Murian said. Musian handed her the ring left by the Demon King. He would seek Lan Murian's help, not because of a random request, but because this woman is a divine body of destiny, able to see through the origin of all things, and even analyze and decompose them. When the Demon King ring fell into Lan Murian's palm, she closed her eyes and peeked at the most primitive essence of the ring. Unknowingly, an incense stick of time passed. Musian was very patient, sitting aside and waiting patiently, looking at the ring in Lan Murian's hand, but his eyes uncontrollably glanced at the front of her white dress several times. The plump breasts that could not be concealed proudly propped up the lapels, and the skin in the candlelit room was still white and smooth. This woman had a ravine on her chest, and she was probably one of the few who could compete with Nai 11. After nearly half a minute, Musian suddenly felt Lan Murian's curled eyelashes tremble slightly, and then slowly opened her eyes. "Senior sister, how is it?" Musian asked immediately. Lan Murian opened her red lips slightly and was about to speak. Boom. However, at this moment, there was a violent shaking from the ground. Musian's side fell on the ring in Lan Murian's hand. At this moment, the Demon King ring in the hands of the senior sister quietly lit up an unprecedented blazing white light. Musian's mind reacted almost immediately. This ring of the first generation Demon King is indeed strange. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 320. This ring is not simply used for the cultivation of future generations, but there are some secrets hidden in this ring. No wonder the first generation Demon Emperor never destroyed it and even kept it with him. At this moment, Musian suddenly realized. It wasn't that the first generation Demon Emperor valued the Tianhuan cultivation technique, but that he valued the potential value hidden behind this ring. If it weren't for Lan Mulian, I'm afraid he wouldn't have noticed the secret of this ring until now. The ground was shaking violently. Musian narrowed his eyes, slowly stretched out his hand, and gently touched the Demon King's ring. The next moment, everything in front of him completely collapsed, and what appeared in his field of vision was no longer the Bwin just now, but a vast white world. This world is the world he sees every time he practices the Tianhuan Kung Fu. Musian just looked around for the first time, and he immediately came up with the answer. Could this be a dream? Musian looked around with a look of uncertainty in his eyes. Lan Mulian looked up at the strange world in front of him and said softly, I heard a rumor in the past that there is a place above Kyushu. It does not even belong to any place in Kyushu. It is a world of nothingness. Even if it is mortals who enter this world can become immortals and become immortal. The world here is somewhat similar to the rumors and descriptions I have heard in the past. Musian's eyes moved slightly and he said softly, Heaven. He had heard of the place Heavenly Court more than once, but he never thought that the world he saw every time he practiced the Tianhuan Kung Fu would actually be Heavenly Court. But why do my senior sister and I appear in this place now? The ring in your hand is probably the key to the heaven, or one of the media. After I analyzed its structure and unlocked the secret technique of the first Demon Emperor to shield the ring, your and my spiritual consciousness can step into the heaven. Lan Mulian's eyes were always clear, and he calmly scanned the white world around him. Heavenly Court, for people from Kyushu, this name may be a bit unfamiliar. But when it comes to the immortal world, anyone who is a monk has basically heard of it. Those who ascend to the immortal world have immortal spiritual consciousness. It is the paradise of monks and the end of the path for monks. Monks spend their entire lives practicing and ascending to heaven, and at the end of the road is heaven. Musian felt this spiritual energy that was completely different from Kyushu, took a deep breath, and exhaled slowly. Unexpectedly, the rumors turned out to be true. Heaven does exist, but countless monks have spent their entire lives unable to find where it is, because it exists in a world of nothingness and requires a medium in heaven to reach it. And the ring in the hand of the first generation Demon King was the medium leading to heaven. The first generation Demon Emperor did not want to destroy this ring. It was because he wanted to set foot in heaven, so he kept this ring. As a result, the first generation Demon Emperor did not expect that he would go to Dongzhou but be suppressed by the Qing Emperor, and would never have the chance to enter the heaven again. What a rich spiritual energy! This kind of spiritual energy is even richer than that of Kyushu. After the rules of heaven and earth were rewritten, Lan Mulian said softly to himself with a bit of surprise in his eyes. Musian closed his eyes slightly and tried to operate the cauldron to absorb the spiritual energy in the fairy world. Then, he soon discovered to his surprise that the spiritual energy of this fairy world could be used directly for his own use with just a little purification, and this spiritual energy was several times richer than that in Kyushu. One day of meditating and cultivating here is probably comparable to 4 or 5 days in the outside world. Heaven is such a good place. Muzian admired sincerely. Lan Mulian nodded silently at first, and then gently shook his head. It's just a pity that heaven has rejected us. Even if we are here, the spiritual energy cannot be absorbed. She had just tried it, but she found that the spiritual energy in the heaven could not be absorbed by the monks at all. It's not her problem, but that the heaven is shrouded in a mysterious force, rejecting all visitors from the outside world. Muzian subconsciously looked at Lan Mulian's beautiful face. Her temperament was like a fairy, which matched the coldness of heaven. She looked like a fairy at the moment. However, the words that came out of her mouth made Muzian couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. The spiritual energy here cannot be absorbed by the monks. Did senior sister try it just now? Muzian asked. Lan Mulian looked sideways, with clear eyes and bright eyes, and nodded slightly. This heaven has been set by invisible forces. When outsiders step into it, they must comply with the rules before they can set foot in the heaven and absorb the spiritual energy. You and I are outside the heaven now. The holy body of destiny can see through the origin of all things, even the heavenly court. However, now Lan Mulian can only see through the surface of the heavenly court, but it is difficult to know what the rules set by the heavenly court are. But when she finished speaking, she saw a look of surprise in Muzian's eyes, as if he had heard something strange, and his face was full of astonishment. What's wrong? Lan Mulian asked. Muzian came back to his senses, looked around the surrounding environment with a somewhat strange look, and shook his head gently. It's okay. The heavenly court has set a rule that any monk who steps into this place cannot absorb the spiritual energy here, let alone set foot in the heavenly court. However, he had just clearly absorbed the spiritual energy in heaven. Is there a bug? The entire heaven was silent, without a sound. Lan Mulian looked at everything in front of him, but seemed very calm, saying, let's leave here first. If ordinary cultivators stepped into the heaven, even if they were just at the door, they would probably not want to leave. After all, being in the heaven means immortality. Even if they can't set foot in the heaven, just being outside the heaven is fine. Most cultivators can't achieve immortality even if they spend their entire lives. But Lan Mulian's Taoism has never wavered. For her, as long as she is given 10 years, she can also achieve Taoism without the heaven. Lan Mulian spread out her palm and handed the Demon King's ring to Muzian. After wearing it, inject your spiritual energy into it, and you can leave here, Lan Mulian said. This ring has had this effect from the beginning, but before Lan Mulian peeked into its origin, the real way to use this ring was blocked by the first generation of Demon King. However, the first generation Demon King was already very weak at that time, so the shielding secret technique applied to this ring was also crude. Lan Mulian raised her hand and injected a wisp of spiritual energy into the ring in Muzian's hand. The next moment, her voice seemed to be gradually becoming illusory and ethereal. She looked at Muzian, who seemed to be still thinking about something and was obviously absent-minded, and said, I'll wait for you outside. Muzian looked at Lan Mulian's figure leaving, and the crisp and pleasant voice coming from his ears, and then he came back to his senses. He took a last look at everything in front of him, and then, with a bit of doubt, he turned on the cauldron again. The spiritual energy in the heavens seemed to have a natural affinity for him, and quietly drilled into Muzian's cauldron. The spiritual energy here can really be absorbed. Muzian was secretly shocked. Senior sister said that the spiritual energy in the heaven can only be absorbed by those who meet the rules, and ordinary cultivators cannot absorb it, but why can I? Could it be that I did something unintentionally that just happened to conform to the rules of the heavenly court? But the problem is that I didn't do anything. Could it be that the master of the heavenly court in the past was also an LSP, and LSPs are attracted to each other, so the other party recognized me? Musian quickly gathered his thoughts, shook his head slowly, and stopped thinking about it. In short, knowing the way to enter the heavenly court, you can slowly investigate this matter after leaving here. Musian thought of this and was about to inject spiritual energy into the ring and turn away. However, just when Musian was about to turn around, there was suddenly an inexplicable cold wind blowing behind him. The cold wind made his body stiffen involuntarily, and he felt a deep chill behind him, and his heart was cold. Then, he seemed to hear a sound vaguely. Footsteps. The entire heavenly court was so quiet that there was no sound, and he could even hear his own breathing. However, in such a quiet environment, he actually heard footsteps. The footsteps were so light that you might miss them if you don't pay attention. But when Musian held his breath, he clearly heard the footsteps. A resident of the heavenly palace? Or did the master of the heavenly palace know that someone from the outside world had entered, so he came out to take a look? Musian was in doubt, and his palm subconsciously placed on the Demon King's ring. He was considering whether to inject spiritual energy directly and leave this place. But in the end, his inner curiosity still overcame the fear deep in his heart. He slowly raised his head and looked at the ancient door in front of him that was shrouded in white mist. An extremely dazzling light fell on his face from the depths of the door. Musian narrowed his eyes and vaguely saw the figure walking at the end of the heavenly palace door. Slender and petite, with half-long hair and a pair of clear and bright eyes, she looked like a Lolita. There must be a lot of people living in this heavenly palace, and this little Lolita ran out by mistake. Musian looked at the silver-haired little Lolita in front of him with a somewhat suspicious look, and asked doubtfully, "Who are you?" The silver-haired Lolita tilted her head slightly and looked at Musian strangely, with a pair of big eyes full of doubts. Then, she opened her arms and said crisply, "Hold me. Are you from the heavenly palace? Do your parents also live in the heavenly palace?" Musian asked again. However, the silver-haired Lolita did not answer, but came to Musian, raised her head and looked at him eagerly, and shouted crisply, "Hold me. Why do I feel that I can't communicate with this little Lolita, so I like the royal sister?" Musian had to bend down and pick her up. Then he looked at this strange cute Lolita and was about to speak. However, at this time, her crisp and pleasant voice first sounded softly in his ears. "In Jizhu, you all call me Tiandeo." Musian's hands holding the Lolita almost let go directly. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 321. Are you the Deo of Heaven? Musian looked at the petite Lolita in front of him and her pair of magnificent red eyes in disbelief, with a hint of disbelief in his eyes. Tiandeo turned out to be a loli. If I leave here later, can I brag to Ruoxi and the others that I was once a man who supported the heavens with one hand? It's quite fun to think about it. It was rare that Musian was still in the mood to joke with himself at this time, and he secretly observed the silver-haired Loli in front of him. In fact, she is not so much a Lolita, but rather somewhere between a girl and a Lolita. She looks slender and petite. When Musian observed her secretly, she also looked at her curiously with a pair of bright and transparent red eyes. Zhu Musian. Then, a sweet smile appeared on her face. "That's right, I am the way of heaven. To be precise, I am the new heavenly Deo. You can also call me Yuan Luo." New Tiandeo. Musian's eyes flashed slightly, as if he thought of something. He lightly opened his personal interface. Among the above titles, a particularly conspicuous title quietly emerged in the field of vision. God's Blessing. In the character positioning column, Musian really saw a very conspicuous line of text. In that line of text, Musian saw a phrase he had seen before, "the choice of new heaven." In the past, after the words "the chosen heroine" appeared, the words "new Tiandeo" appeared in the introduction below, so Musian was still somewhat impressed by this. Heaven's blessing refers to the new heaven's blessing, in other words, she has been secretly protecting me in the past. However, why did the new Tiandeo look like a loli? Mu Jian had too many questions in his heart that he wanted to ask and complain about, but he still asked the question he was most concerned about at the moment. Why are you in heaven? And why are you like this? Tiandeo does not have a fixed body size, but it is more convenient for me to restrain my power in this posture, the silver-haired loli in her arms said with a smile. Heaven is ruthless. This is the inherent impression in almost every monk's eyes. However, at this moment, this silver-haired loli seemed quite lively and cheerful. She put her delicate hands on Musian's shoulders and gently broke away from his arms. Then, under Musian's unbelievable gaze, the silver-haired Lolita exuded a faint white halo. Then, her body shape quietly changed, from a little Lolita to a tall one. Looks like a royal sister. As the white light quietly disappeared, a woman wearing an elegant white dress appeared not far in front of Musian. With her hands behind her back, she has a slender figure and a graceful figure. Her smooth hair and white dress accentuate her clean and elegant literary atmosphere. Although she looks like a girl, she has an extremely proud figure. Damn it, Kalookiu, Musian's eyes lit up slightly. Then, he calmed down a little and calmed down a little. He raised his head and asked, "You will come out before I leave heaven, what do you want to say?" Yuan Luo nodded matter-of-factly, "I thought you would enter the depths of the heaven, and I was already prepared to fool you. I didn't expect that you didn't plan to come in to see me at all. Instead, you planned to leave as soon as you arrived." Her speaking voice changed from a crisp and sweet voice to a sexy voice. "If I want to go in, I have to be able to get in. If I want to set foot in the heaven, I need to comply with the rules, right?" Musian said helplessly. Although he still didn't quite believe that the cute guy in front of him could be the new Tiandeo, at least he was from heaven, which was already certain. "You didn't come to heaven to look for me, so what were you here for?" Yuan Luo looked up at him with a pair of curious red eyes. Her size had gradually shrunk and she had turned into the little Lolita she was at the beginning. As she said, "Only in this form can the power be maintained without overflowing." The more Musian looked at it, the more his heart palpitated, and he became more amazed at the Lolita in front of him. A natural spirit body can keenly sense the aura and realm of others, unless the other person's realm is much higher than his. And he has also come into contact with several beings in the Hedeo realm during this period, and only those in the Hedeo realm can completely restrain their breath and not even notice the slightest fluctuation of spiritual energy. In other words, even if this loli is not in the realm of heaven, at least it is in the realm of harmony. Musian opened his palm, and a ring was exposed in the air. "I arrived in this world of nothingness through this ring. I originally wanted to find the threshold for practicing the Tianhuan Kung Fu." Musian paused for a moment and looked at the silver-haired Lolita again. "The heavenly phoenix technique seems to be spread from the heavenly court." Yuan Luo nodded slightly and said with a smile, "The Tianhuan cultivation technique indeed originated from heaven. This ring is also a product of heaven and is also one of the media leading to heaven." "I guessed it right. The first demon emperor left this ring because it involved heaven." Musian's eyes flashed slightly and he looked at Yuan Luo and said, "From your tone just now, it seems you know me." Yuan Luo didn't answer, but gently tugged on Musian's clothes with her little hands, raised her head, looked at him longingly with a pair of red eyes, and opened her hands for a hug. "Brother, give me a hug." Musian was quite speechless. He always felt that the other party was not like Tiandeo because the other party acted like a child. He wanted to go back, but he still bent down and hugged Yuan Luo again. Yuan Luo narrowed her eyes comfortably, seemingly enjoying herself. "Do you know me?" Musian looked at the silver-haired Lolita in his arms. Yuan Luo pecked her head like a chicken, narrowed her red eyes and looked at him with a smile. "I know you. Someone told me before that I could see you here, so I have never left the heaven." Musian was slightly stunned. You mean you stay here because you have an agreement with someone? For some reason, he suddenly thought of someone in his mind. Concubine Shang Yan. However, this time, Musian heard the answer that was completely opposite to what he expected. That's not right. Who is that? Musian asked. Yuan Luo looked at Musian with a smile on her face and said nothing. Only at this time, Musian felt that she was a bit like a new heaven. Her eyes were calm, as if she had seen through everything in the world. In other words, her liveliness and cheerfulness just now were just a cover-up, and she was simply imitating human personality. From the looks of it, she had no intention of explaining the matter. Seeing that the other party did not answer, Muse Hickson accepted the idea and did not continue to ask any more questions. You came to see me. Do you have anything to say? Musian asked. The silver-haired loli narrowed her eyes and smiled. If you have to say it, it's nothing. I just want to meet my big brother. While she was speaking, she lowered her head and sniffed Musian's body, her delicate eyebrows furrowed slightly, and said, You are mixed with many kinds of spiritual energy. I have a special physique, so the spiritual energy composition in the cauldron is probably also relatively complex, Musian explained. However, Yuan Luo stretched out a finger and pointed at Musian's chest, and said with a smile, There are more than 4 kinds of spiritual energy in the natural furnace cauldron that are not your own, and the spiritual energy of each type is Hedeo. It's something that can only be left if you have had close contact with the other person. Although Musian is an LSP, he was still a little shocked to be exposed like this by a little girl. He coughed lightly and changed the subject. If I leave heaven in the future, can I come back here again? Okay, Yuan Luo replied. As long as you have that ring, you can step into heaven at any time. In the final analysis, as long as the coordinates of the heavenly palace can be found, anyone in the Hedeo realm can still set foot here even without this ring. As for whether you can enter the heaven, it's not certain. Yuan Luo's red eyes looked at the ancient bronze door behind her that led to the heaven. So it's okay if I want to stay here to practice? Musian asked with a somewhat joking tone. The spiritual energy in heaven is many times that of the outside world. If he can practice in heaven, supplemented by the pills given by several leaders before, he might be able to reach the 5th level of God refining during the Immortal Ascension Conference. However, this was the question, but Musian actually didn't have much expectations. After all, this kind of practice can be said to be through the back door. It stands to reason that the way of heaven is fair and just, and it is impossible to help other monks cheat. After all, if he can stay here to practice, he can even let the Tiansheng furnace absorb the spiritual energy here, and then transfer it to Bairuoxi and others after returning. Okay. However, the next moment, Yuan Luo's answer made Musian stunned for a moment. He subconsciously looked at the silver-haired loli with a hint of surprise in his eyes. If it's you, you can do whatever you want in heaven. The rules allow your existence, Yuan Luo continued. Did she agree? Hearing the unexpected answer, a trace of doubt flashed in Musian's eyes. After a moment, he finally reacted and asked, What are the rules of heaven? He remembered that Lan Mulian had said something similar just now. If you want to absorb the spiritual energy in heaven, you need to be someone who has been approved by the rules of heaven. At first, he thought that he was able to absorb spiritual energy because of the natural furnace cauldron, but now it seems that this time it seems to have nothing to do with the natural furnace cauldron. Actually, if I have to say it, there are no rules in heaven, Yuan Luo said. Musian wondered, in that case, why couldn't the other female cultivator who traveled with me earlier absorb the spiritual energy in heaven? Yuan Luo glanced at Musian, narrowed her eyes and smiled, because heaven does not recognize her, she cannot absorb spiritual energy. How can I get the approval of Heavenly Court? Muse Hainan asked when Heavenly Court recognized me. I obviously came in together with my senior sister, but I was recognized by Heavenly Court, but senior sister was not. The way to absorb the spiritual energy in heaven or stay here for a long time is very simple. Yuan Luo pursed her lips and raised her hand to point behind Musian. She looked at Musian with a smile and said leisurely, "If you can push that door open, you will be recognized by heaven." Musian subconsciously turned his head and looked around. Behind him stood a huge bronze door. It seemed to reach into the sky and the earth, and was filled with an ancient and solemn atmosphere. Although he has never stepped into it, Musian has a feeling. Behind this bronze door is probably what the monks call the immortal world, which is the heaven. But what Yuan Luo just said made people a little concerned. Only by being able to open this door can he be recognized by heaven, but the problem is that he has never opened this door at all. With doubts flashing in Musian's eyes, he gently put down the Lolita in his arms, and then walked slowly towards the door to the heaven behind him. The solemn and majestic gate exudes an ancient atmosphere, and 2 stone tablets stand on both sides of the gate. Musian's eyes fell on the stone tablet on the left, and he read out the words carved on the stone tablet: "Those who want to enter this door must be a woman and wear a short skirt." Look at the stone tablet on the right: "Wear stockings made of nirvana silk produced in Yaokai Holy Land." Musian fell into deep contemplation for a long time, joking to himself, "This Lord of Heaven's hobbies are exactly the same as mine?" In fact, he had vaguely guessed something in his mind. How can there be so many coincidences in this world? Musian suppressed his smile and slowly stretched out his hand to press on the door. The bronze gate didn't even move at all. He closed his eyes slightly, and then injected a ray of spiritual energy into the bronze door. However, still nothing happened. Is this new heavenly way playing tricks on me? Musian slowly opened his eyes and was about to turn his head to look at the little loli behind him. Boom! At this time, the ancient and heavy door behind him made a violent sound. Then, under Musian's gaze, the ancient bronze door slowly opened. At this time, Yuan Luo's calm and clear voice came from behind: "Actually, even if you don't push open the door, you will still be recognized by heaven. As for the reason..." She looked up at Musian and whispered, "Because you are the one who sets the rules of heaven." Southern Wilderness. In a huge church, the huge goddess sculpture standing at the end of the church cracked a gap. From the gap, a ray of light seemed to quietly light up, and then flew out of the church. The female priests who were kneeling in front of the goddess sculpture slowly raised their heads and looked up, their eyes full of fear. This sculpture is the first goddess of the Southern Wilderness Holy Land. It is said that after she merged with the Tao, she ascended to the fairy world and transcended the world. From the past to the present, priests from all generations will pray devoutly in front of her. However, this is the first time that a goddess sculpture has received such a strong response. Located deep in the church, an evil god quietly opened his eyes and stared deeply in a certain direction. After a while, he took a slow breath and whispered to himself, "The coordinates of the road to immortality are actually in the Lianji section." Lianji sect, Tianhewan. Yao Meng, who was meditating, seemed to notice something, and then opened his eyes. His green eyes stared in the direction of Lianji Peak, with a hint of doubt in his eyes. The road to immortality actually appeared? And Yao Meng narrowed his eyes inadvertently. For some reason, she always felt that there seemed to be a very familiar atmosphere in this road to immortality. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 322. The heavenly palace has been passed down from ancient times to the present by the cultivators, but most people only know that it is the fairyland, but they don't know that the heavenly palace and the fairyland are the same place. Most cultivators spend their entire lives to achieve enlightenment and ascend to the fairyland. The reason for this is that if it is in Jizhu, there can only be one great master who has achieved the Tao in each life, but in the heavenly palace, there can be more than 2 great masters who have achieved the Tao in one life. Moreover, even after 2 great masters have achieved the Tao, the rules of heaven and earth will not be rewritten, and other cultivators can still achieve enlightenment. In addition, the spiritual energy in the heavenly palace is also extremely rich. If mortals are here, they may find it difficult to survive, because ordinary people cannot absorb the mixed spiritual energy in the air, and they cannot even breathe here. It can be said that the heavenly palace is a paradise for cultivators, but mortals dare not set foot in it anyway. The first generation of demon kings spent their entire lives trying to set foot in the heavenly palace, but they did not expect that the road to becoming an immortal would appear after his death. No, it is better to say that if the first demon king had not died, there would be no heaven, even if Muzion had obtained the demon king's ring. The death of the first demon king brought about the arrival of the immortal age, and only in the immortal age would the road to immortality appear. At this moment, in Lianji Peak, a heavenly staircase emitting a faint halo appeared silently in people's sight. Many cultivators came upon hearing the news, and when they saw this road to immortality, their eyes were filled with a bit of fanaticism. The road to immortality is the lifelong pursuit of countless cultivators, but now it has appeared in front of them like this. If there were no trace of reason left, I am afraid that some people would have been unable to resist and directly climbed the road to immortality. Is there another person at the end of this road to immortality? At this time, a voice of surprise and doubt suddenly came from the crowd, with a tone of surprise and disbelief, but hidden in the eyes, was deep awe and worship. The person who spoke was Lin Yuan, the saint of the Swanyan Palace in Dongzhou. There was a faint black mist behind him, and his temperament was extraordinary. This 7th grade divine master had not competed for more than half an hour in the past 2 days. He was one of the most powerful competitors in the Ascension Conference, but at this moment he could not hide the surprise on his face. For Lin Yuan, this road to immortality appeared at just the right time. To be honest, he was not confident that he could win the first championship of the Ascension Conference, but if he could get some immortal fate in the road to immortality, even if he could not set foot in the heaven, he would have the confidence to win this Ascension Conference. After all, it is rumored that one can ascend to the Tao by setting foot in the immortal world. Not to mention such a distant thing as enlightenment, but even if one can feel a trace of Taorim from the immortal world, it will be of great benefit in the future. And after that, it can also let you see that the saint of the Swanyan Palace is much more powerful than the outsider Muzion. In terms of strength alone, he can even crush him. As Lin Yuan's whispering fell, more and more people noticed the man at the end of the immortal road, so they looked up and saw a tall figure in a black robe. At this moment, all the cultivators were moved. There is someone at the end of this immortal road. Another elder from an ancient force in Dongzhou couldn't help but speak, looking at the end of the immortal road, frowned and said, I have heard that the heaven also has its master in the past. His strength is no less than that of Hideo. Could it be, this person is the master of the heaven? Yes, the end of the immortal road is the master of the heaven. Soon someone else spoke excitedly. If it weren't for the elders of their tribe secretly stopping them, they might have been tempted to climb this immortal road and ascend to heaven. But even so, no cultivator made any move at this moment. The dozen or so land immortals present had some insight. They noticed the abnormality of this immortal road. Although this immortal road leading to the heaven looked sacred and noble, and even had rich spiritual energy that did not belong to Jizhu. But it seemed too weird. In the past, the immortal road had appeared several times in history, and each time it attracted countless cultivators. Many land immortals in the Return to Void realm disappeared after stepping into it. The immortal road was full of dead bones, and this was not meant to scare people. But at this moment, this immortal road did not have any dangerous aura. Such an abnormality made people fearful. In the crowd, the saint of the southern wilderness looked calm, looking up at this immortal road. It was completely a death wish for the refining God realm to step into this place. She was very calm and open-minded, knowing that now was not the time to step into the immortal road. Lan Feiying narrowed her eyes and stared at the immortal road, or more precisely, the young man in black robe at the end of the immortal road. Her enchanting eyes were filled with a strangeness, as if she had noticed something. Since all of you fellow Taoists are so busy, let me find out first. At this time, an elder from an ancient family finally couldn't help himself. He laughed loudly, turned into a stream of light, and rushed into the road to heaven. It was in the shape of a circular staircase, covered with white mist, exuding a sacred atmosphere. Boom! Not long after the elder stepped into it, at the end of the road to immortality, there was a deafening sound. Soon, people heard the elder who flew into the road to immortality screaming in fear. "No, why are there so many skeletons in this place? This rich spiritual energy is rejecting my cauldron." People looked up one after another and saw the elder who had just stepped into the path to immortality. He was obviously a monk in the realm of returning to the realm of immortality, but at this moment when he stepped into the path to immortality, he did not emit any fluctuations of spiritual energy, as if he were an ordinary monk. Ordinary people. Afterwards, the elder's body slowly began to decay, until it finally completely dissipated between heaven and earth. This scene caused the monks present to fall into a deathly silence. The proud young people just looked at the scene and felt cold sweat running down their backs. They secretly thanked the elders of their families for stopping them. This road to becoming an immortal does not necessarily lead to the immortal world, or it may disappear forever after setting foot on it. Or maybe it was the man at the end of the road to immortality who rejected them. As the first elder who wanted to eat crabs died, many monks also looked at the young man in mid-air who turned his back to all sentient beings at the end of the road to immortality. For a time, many people were secretly guessing what the Lord of Heaven wanted to do and why he allowed the path to immortality to appear. Obviously, no one would have thought that the reason why this young man who turned his back to all living beings at this moment was simply thinking about whether the rules of heaven should be changed, for example, by replacing stockings made of nirvana silk with ordinary stockings. Stockings and the like. After all, the requirements can't be too high. Musean scanned the surrounding environment and layout. The black robe looks solemn, and the light golden lines add a bit of luxury. The rather handsome facial features seemed to be shrouded in a layer of mist at this moment, and the black eyes were extremely calm. If someone were watching the scene at this moment, they would probably see a hint of thinking in his indifferent expression. It only gives people a majestic back, like an immortal king overlooking everything in the world, high above. Facts have proved how great the bonus of scenes is. If people in the outside world knew that the Lord of Heaven at the end of the immortal road was a fourth-grade god refiner, and that they were not even thinking about becoming an immortal but how to formulate rules for beauties, I don't know what they would think. Of course, Musean doesn't care what others think, or in other words, he doesn't have the time and grace to care about these things at the moment. Because at this moment he is thinking about why he is the rule maker. Because of the blessing of this little loli. His eyes inadvertently looked at the silver-haired Lolita not far away. She was wearing a sweet and cute smile, but for some reason, the charm of a mature woman seemed to be revealed in that smile that looked good. It stands to reason that cuteness is vulnerable to sexiness, but Yuan Luo perfectly combines the two temperaments. But, from the beginning, she didn't answer any questions I asked her. Musean pondered for a moment and said, "You said that I am the rule maker of heaven, which means that everything here is decided by me. You can rewrite the rules, but the God-refining realm cannot fully control this heaven." Yuan Luo nodded slightly. Musean raised his head and stared at the opened bronze door. After pondering for a long time, he asked, "What is the difference between heaven and Kyushu?" The little loli raised her head and seemed to be thinking about Musean's words. After a moment, he said with a crisp and pleasant voice, "If I must say it, the aura in heaven is several times richer than that in Kyushu, and there are many special techniques and medicinal materials in it that are not available in the outside world. Then if I absorb the spiritual energy of heaven into the natural furnace, can I feed it back to others?" Musean asked. "Okay, this time, Yuan Luo gave him an affirmative answer. Musian fell into deep thought. Although he vaguely guessed that this was feasible, he was still a little surprised after hearing Yuan Luo say this. Absorbing the spiritual energy of heaven into the natural furnace, he can then feed it back to others. During the period of absorbing the spiritual energy, even he himself can also practice here. The spiritual energy in the heaven is extremely rich, but you can't practice here all the time. With your current physique, 2 hours a day is already the limit. As if she had guessed Musian's thoughts, Yuan Luo suddenly said. However, you are the maker of the rules of heaven. After you refine your spirit and return to the void in the future, the time you can absorb spiritual energy in heaven can also be extended. Musian listened to little Lolita's explanation and gradually understood the structure of this heaven. This heaven is what the monks call the fairyland. This is the lifelong pursuit of all monks. If you are in heaven, you will never grow old or die. And he is the maker of the rules of heaven. As for the reason, Tiandao didn't say anything, but Musian guessed that it had something to do with the Tiandao's blessing in his personal interface. Heavenly Court is inextricably linked to this new heavenly way. She has been waiting here for the appearance of the ruler of Heavenly Court, or in other words, the Lord of Heavenly Court. But judging from Musian's past experience, the secret of the Lord of Heaven must be kept. If the outside world knows it, it will not do him any good. After all, this little Lolita of heaven would not help him, otherwise he would not have died once in the past at the Yaokai Holy Land. Musian could actually accept this result. After all, even just 2 hours of practice time in heaven every day can provide huge help for future practice. Moreover, the spiritual energy of this heaven has no realm. When meditating and practicing here, he can even let the natural furnace absorb the spiritual energy of this place. The spiritual energy in the heaven can even help the Empress in the Tao realm. The next moment, Musian was sitting cross-legged in front of the bronze door, with his hair flying, absorbing the aura of heaven for his own use. The time he can spend in heaven is limited. Since Yuan Luo said that he can only stay in heaven for 2 hours, the best solution is to meditate and practice here. Looking at the other side, everyone did not expect that the young man with his back to the common people in their eyes was actually a participating monk in the Immortal Ascension Conference. At this moment, they all restrained from the idea of setting foot in heaven because of the elders of the ancient family who died in vain. But the monks did not leave just yet, because they all knew that the real power had not arrived yet. Monks in the God refining and returning to the void realm cannot set foot here, but what about the Hedao realm? You know, there are 4 Hedao realms in the current Lianji sect. Qing Emperor is here. At this time, a scream came from the side, with deep awe and admiration hidden in the eyes. This first-generation saint of the Yaokai Holy Land was as slender as a fairy, with her feet as smooth as white jade stepping on the void, walking slowly towards the road to immortality. Her body seemed to be hazy with mist, and the silk on her body was made of nirvana silk, with a little bit of brilliance, making everyone present focus their attention. At this moment, everyone fell silent, and in this silent space, they soon saw another elegant woman in a white dress. The Empress of Yuzhou, the heavenly alchemist, Luo Ten. Luo Ten was half hanging in front of the stairs of Changxian Road. He raised his head and stared at Yao Meng, who was standing in front of Changxian Road. He lightly opened his red lips and said, "In the past, Changxian Road has only appeared less than 4 times. Unexpectedly, this life will appear here in such an unexpected way." When she said this, she glanced at Yao Meng, who was standing in front of the immortal road inadvertently, and a trace of doubt flashed in her eyes. Unlike the return to the void realm, she could clearly feel the dangers on this road to immortality. This road to immortality had rejected other monks, so the elders who had just set foot here died here. At this moment, Luo Ten could feel that the road to becoming an immortal also rejected her. Even if you force your way through the road to immortality and reach heaven, you won't be able to get anything from heaven. However, This fairy Yao Meng clearly did not use her spiritual energy, but ended up standing peacefully on the road to immortality. Logically speaking, there should be no difference between fairy Yao Meng and her. But why was Yao Meng able to embark on the road to immortality, but he was rejected on the road to immortality? This road to immortality has never appeared several times since ancient times, but this time it has come to Kyushu because of the death of the first demon emperor. It's really interesting. At this time, a man's deep voice suddenly came from behind. He was dressed in black robes and had a majestic figure. He raised his head and stared at the road to immortality with extremely profound eyes. Soon, he shook his head again and said, "Unfortunately, the time has not come yet. This road to immortality is just an illusion, and it is difficult for anyone to set foot on it." Lord of the Forbidden Zone. Someone in the crowd immediately recognized the man in black robes, their eyes filled with admiration. Luo Tan nodded silently, her white skirt inlaid with gold threads blown wildly by the cold wind. She raised her head and stared at the beauty in the green skirt standing in front of the road to immortality, and then withdrew her gaze. Although I don't know why fairy Yao Meng was not rejected on the road to immortality, fortunately, there is no time to become an immortal now, not to mention whether Yao Meng can set foot in heaven. Even if she could, fairy Yao Meng would not be able to absorb any spiritual energy from heaven. Otherwise, she might be the first person to become an immortal. The Empress of Yuzhou thought about this and was about to look back and leave. However, when she caught a glimpse of the black-robed figure at the end of the road to immortality from the corner of her eye, a hint of doubt flashed in her eyes. Although the man in black robe was shrouded in mist, his figure was obscured, but just looking at his back, he had an extraordinary temperament, as if he was an immortal emperor coming to this world. But for some reason, she always felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity. It's like, I have seen this person somewhere before. On the other side, not long after the Lord of the Forbidden Zone left Lianji Peak, Ye Lingxian, who had just arrived not far away, came towards him and immediately shouted, "Father!" The owner of the restricted area looked around, and his stoic and cold face softened a lot. He looked at his daughter's figure with soft eyes and said, "Is everything going well with your practice here?" Ye Lingxian nodded slightly and said with a smile, "The road to immortality is so attractive that even you are alarmed." The owner of the restricted area shook his head and said with a smile, "I'm not very interested in heaven. It's just that your mother is worried about you during this Immortal Ascension conference, so she stopped by to take a look." As he spoke, he looked at Ye Lingxian again, narrowed his eyes, and said unkindly, "Where is that boy from the Mu family?" He could detect the changes in Ye Lingxian's body. The spiritual energy in her cauldron was mixed with Muxian's spiritual energy. And this also shows that, after that guy returned to the sect, he had physical contact with his daughter. Suddenly Muxian was mentioned, a faint blush flashed across Ye Lingxian's pretty face. She stood with her head bowed, her fingertips fiddled with a strand of hair, and whispered, "During the Immortal Ascension Conference, Brother Mu is also be busy preparing for the Immortal Ascension Conference." She paused and continued, "Otherwise, if he doesn't get a decent ranking, Dad will dislike him again, right?" When Ye Lingxian said this, she glanced at the owner of the restricted area, with undisguised dissatisfaction in her tone. She didn't know why the owner of the restricted area was so dissatisfied with Muxian. Brother Mu was obviously considerate and gentle, and would bring some small surprises to people from time to time. Apart from being weak-willed and easily bewitched by vixens from the outside world, he had no shortcomings. But it doesn't matter what the vixen is, just bring Brother Mu back to the restricted area in the future. A weak will can be tempered. After that, she can also help temper Brother Mu's will, together with Jian'er. Unexpectedly, the owner of the restricted area sneered, "Are you so sure that your Brother Mu is meditating and practicing peacefully? Based on what I know about him, I can't tell you which woman he is still having sex with right now." Ye Lingxian said unconvinced, "Why do you slander Brother Mu so much?" The owner of the restricted area snorted coldly, "Slander? I see the shadow of myself in him. I was much more carefree than him back then. How could I not know what he was thinking? Ya Lingxian. Where is your lock of desolate time? Since you don't believe it, use the lock of desolate time to see where he is now." Seeing Ya Lingxuan's obvious disbelief and even skeptical attitude, the owner of the restricted area spoke again. Ya Lingxian naturally refused to be convinced. She raised her hand and a golden chain in the cuff quietly flew out from the snow-white wrist. The Lord of the Forbidden Zone raised his hand, and the lock of desolate time stayed in his palm. The Lord of the Forbidden Zone waved his sleeves, and one of the locks of the lock of desolate time swept towards the direction of Lianji Peak with a sound like breaking wind. Soon, it disappeared into the void, but it still arrived. A special garden in Lianji Peak. The other end of the lock of desolate time formed a rectangular shape. This is another great ability of the lock of desolate time. Anyone who is locked can see where the other person is and what they are doing as long as they are not far away. The person locked by the lock of desolate time is Musian. However, Ya Lingxian is only in the God refining realm now, and the ability to peek can only be used in the return to the void realm. If he reaches the return to void realm in the future, Ya Lingxian will even be able to see what Musian is doing every day. The next moment, the scene in the lock of desolate time appeared in the field of vision. The picture shows a secluded garden, and Lan Mulian, who has just returned to her spiritual consciousness, is quietly staring at Musian. She has a cold temperament, delicate and beautiful facial features, plump and tall breasts, and a pale golden moonlight printed on her white skirt. Pattern. After staring for a while, the cold and flawless senior sister hesitated for a moment, stretched out a delicate hand, and gently pushed aside Musian's forehead hair. But Musian made no movement from beginning to end. Ya Lingxian suddenly bit her lip, with deep peach blossom eyes, and looked at Musian deeply. Brother Mu is not practicing, but has gone to find his senior sister. He obviously said before that he was busy practicing, so he will be busy during this period. However, at this time, the eyes of the owner of the restricted area flickered slightly, and he said in surprise, "No. His spiritual consciousness is not in his body." Hearing this, Ya Lingxian was stunned for a moment, as if she saw hope, and subconsciously looked at the owner of the restricted area. "Dad, what does this mean?" However, the owner of the restricted area did not speak this time and stared at the young man in the picture. As if he thought of something, the Lord of the Forbidden Zone slowly raised his head and stared at the end of the road to immortality. The figure of the young man in black robe slowly and completely overlapped with that of Musian. After an unknown amount of time, the owner of the restricted area came to his senses as if in a trance. Under Ya Lingxuan's gaze, he whispered softly to himself in disbelief, "The Master of Heaven, could it be him?" 6K votes requested. Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to inform us. We will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 323. The Lord of the Forbidden Zone put his hands behind his back and looked up at the end of the immortal road. At this moment, the man at the end of the immortal road was covered with hazy white mist, and there seemed to be runes flashing behind him, with extraordinary momentum. If ordinary people saw it for the first time, they would probably only feel awe at the first time. However, the Lord of the Forbidden Zone also knew something about the heavenly court in the past, and the more he looked at the figure at this moment, the more strange he felt. Others could not see the true appearance of the back through the white mist, but it did not mean that he could not. And at this moment, in front of the Lord of the Forbidden Zone, the back with its back to all living beings was slowly overlapping with a young man whose spiritual consciousness was not in his body. "Dad, what are you looking at?" Ye Lingxian couldn't help asking. She raised her head and looked at the immortal road emitting white mist. And the young man with his back to all living beings at the end of the immortal road. Unlike most female cultivators in the sect, who had admiration in their eyes, Ye Lingxian acted very indifferent and even calm. For her, it doesn't matter whether she enters the heavenly palace or not. In the future, she will enter the Hedeo realm. Even if she doesn't enter the heavenly palace, she can still be immortal. But for some reason, she has been quite concerned about this black-robed man since before. She always feels that he looks familiar. "Dad, does he know him?" Ye Lingxian raised her clear and bright eyes and asked. The Lord of the Forbidden Zone came back to his senses from his thoughts just now, and looked at the purple-dressed girl beside him with complicated eyes. The spiritual energy of the heavenly palace can be forcibly absorbed by the powerful people in the Hedeo realm if they want to. However, the melon is not sweet if it is forced. Even if he steps into the road to becoming an immortal at this moment, it doesn't make much sense. But his daughter is different. Others may not be able to see the true body of this young man with his back to the world through the white mist, but the Lord of the Forbidden Zone can. "How well is the dragon Tengsu in your body nurtured now?" the Lord of the Forbidden Zone asked. Ye Lingxian was slightly startled and said, "About 50%. Dragon whiskers, this is a gift given to her by Musian in the past. It originated from the early period of chaos. Those who refine dragon whiskers will be able to obtain a wisp of broken chaos energy in the future. However, the medicinal materials left over from the early period of chaos have long been withered. If Ye Lingxian herself was not a small reincarnation water, dragon whiskers would probably have completely withered." The Lord of the Forbidden Zone raised his hand and wiped out the picture presented by the desolate time lock. Then, he said, "Reincarnation water can nourish the withered dragon Tengsu. During the period when you refine the dragon Tengsu, the longer you use the reincarnation water to nourish it, the more chaotic energy you can obtain in the future, which will be of great benefit to your future. If you can get more concentrated spiritual energy to nourish the dragon Tengsu during this period, perhaps you can cultivate a complete strand of chaotic energy." When the chaos first opened, a ball of fire was born in Jizhu. It did not burn the world, but instead warmed the earth with chaotic energy. After that, the world changed drastically. Those plants gradually evolved because of the chaotic energy, but in the end, most of them were still lost in the long river of history. And the dragon Tengsu is a medicinal material that survived in the long river of history. Ye Lingxian nodded slightly. "I know how to handle this matter, don't worry, Dad. Even if I can't get the complete chaotic energy, even a wisp of broken chaotic energy is enough. The spiritual energy in the heaven is more special. If it is warmed by the spiritual energy there, maybe Longtansu can bloom in the most perfect posture," the Lord of the Forbidden Zone sighed. Ye Lingxian didn't care, and smiled lightly. "I know, Dad, is there anything else?" The Lord of the Forbidden Zone raised his eyebrows slightly and said, "Can't I talk to you more if I have nothing to do?" Ye Lingxian smiled and said, "My daughter also wants to win the competition of the Ascension Conference, so if I have nothing to do, I want to go back to meditate and practice. Now Brother Mu is still with Senior Sister, and Senior Sister just touched him. I always feel a little uneasy." The Lord of the Forbidden Zone naturally saw what his daughter was thinking, but he still waved his hand and sighed, "Forget it, go ahead." Although he didn't like the pig that took his cabbage, but, if we put aside Musian's half-hearted character, he did everything else perfectly. At least according to his original expectation, no matter how talented Ye Lingxian was, it would be impossible for her to comprehend a trace of Taoism so early. And this is what Musian's auxiliary ability brings. What's more, Musian's real auxiliary ability is far more than just the natural furnace. The Lord of the Forbidden Zone put his hands behind his back and looked at his daughter's figure leaving from a distance, but his eyes were a little more complicated. If Musian was more focused, he would be a perfect Taoist partner. It's a pity that he was too fickle like when he was young. The Forbidden Zone secretly shook his head and sighed. Although he, the Lord of the Forbidden Zone, had not thought about it, even now, he also had more than one Taoist partner. Musian naturally did not know what was happening in the outside world at the moment. He was still immersed in his own world, absorbing the spiritual energy from the heavenly court. After nearly an hour, Musian opened his eyes. He clicked on the personal interface and found that a new box appeared at the end of the titles. The text in the box was a little blurry, but Musian still recognized what the text described above was at a glance. Lord of the Heavenly Court. Musian stared at the title that appeared in front of him and fell into deep thought. The title of the Lord of Heaven was not fully activated, and the text on it looked a little blurry. I seem to know roughly what the structure of heaven is like. This should be related to the spiritual energy I absorbed from heaven. Musian muttered to himself thoughtfully, then turned his head to look at the silver-haired little loli behind him and said, Yuan Luo, have you been secretly observing me in the past, or even protecting me? The heavenly Dao will not specifically observe someone, but I have indeed been secretly protecting you in the past. Yuan Luo paused and continued, but with my current power, I can't observe you from the outside world, and the heavenly Dao in Zhu will notice it? There are two heavenly Daos. Musian seemed to think of something. You are the new heavenly Dao, and the heavenly Dao in Zhu is the old heavenly Dao. Yuan Luo nodded. She walked slowly to Musian's side with her hands behind her back, and a lovely smile bloomed on her face. Big brother knows so much. But what you said is not entirely correct. Yuan Luo smiled with narrowed eyes. Big brother, have you ever thought about why I protect you? Musian did not say anything, just stared at this heavenly Dao Lolita. I need you to choose to merge with me when you enter the Hedao realm in the future. Yuan Luo spoke the truth. Musian was stunned. He knew that after entering the Hedao realm, there were three choices for cultivators: the heaven, earth, and man. The cultivator would merge with one of the three ways and become the strongest in the world. Why? Musian asked. After you merge with me, I can replace the heavenly Dao of Zhu and become the new heavenly Dao in the future. Yuan Luo smiled sweetly and continued, it's not a loss, isn't it your favorite thing to merge with a beautiful girl? Musian wanted to complain that you are at most a big loli, a pretty girl, but when he thought of her other queen attitude before, he fell silent. What's the matter with Yayu? Musian suddenly remembered this matter. He is the son of destiny chosen by the old heavenly Dao. To put it bluntly, he is the son of heaven. Yuan Luo answered. What if I kill him? When Musian asked again, Yuan Luo just shook her head. You can't kill him. No matter how big the matter is, as long as the old heavenly Dao is not dead, you will not die. Unless his destiny can be continuously reduced, the son of destiny you mentioned may fall. The old heavenly Dao cannot directly intervene in the affairs of the world, but can only influence others in the dark. In this way, is Yayu really the son of destiny? Musian's eyes have a little more thoughtfulness. No wonder Yayu was still alive and kicking after being suppressed by himself so many times, and even suspected of getting the energy of heaven. It turns out that everything is the old heavenly Dao guiding Yayu in the dark. It's just a pity that the old heavenly Dao chose a Dishbi. So, the old heavenly Dao chose Yayu, and I am your choice. Musian raised his head and asked. Yuan Luo tilted her head slightly, revealing a sweet smile. A strand of silver hair fell in front of her shoulders, adding a bit of charm. The one who chose you was not me, she said softly. Outside the Lianji Peak, there was a dead silence. Yao Meng looked up and stared at the young man at the end of the road to immortality, as if thinking about something. Senior Kingdi, I have heard in the past that after the integration of Dao, you can become an immortal. It stands to reason that with your current realm, it should not be difficult to pass through the heavenly court, but why? At this time, among the crowd, an old man from an ancient family couldn't help but raise his hands and bow, and asked respectfully. Yao Meng shook her head slightly. The time for the road to immortality has not come yet, and it cannot be forced. She was like the nine heavens' mysterious woman, her blue and white interwoven dress fluttering in the cold wind, standing with her hands behind her back, and she was peerless. Facing the opportunity to become an immortal, his expression remained calm. All the cultivators on the ground stared at the road to immortality with fiery eyes. If the person who spoke this was not the Green Emperor but an elder, some of these young cultivators would probably be unable to resist stepping into the road to immortality. But even this female emperor said that the time for the road to immortality has not come yet, and she herself has never set foot on it. This is enough to explain something. Senior Green Emperor is so handsome and elegant. Since even she said so, this road to immortality is probably not something we can get involved in now. At this time, an elder in the crowd shook his head and sighed, his tone full of regret. There may be opportunities in the future. We are only in the realm of refining spirits now, but if we can refine spirits and return to the void in time, we will have the opportunity to step into the path of immortality and ascend to heaven the next time the path to immortality appears. Yes, the more important thing now is the Immortal Ascension Conference. With 3 imperial-level medicinal herbs, it is not difficult to refine spirits and return to the void. The young generation all ignited their fighting spirits. Unlike some elders whose lifespans are coming to an end, they have just started and have a great chance to lie dormant until the next appearance of the path to immortality. Junior Sister Bai, with your current cultivation speed, you will definitely have a place when the path to immortality appears next time. Don't be too discouraged. In the crowd, Enlingyu looked at Bairuoxi's seemingly dazed eyes and couldn't help but encourage him in a gentle voice. Bairuoxi suddenly came back to his senses and smiled. Thank you, Senior Sister. I will work hard to practice and live up to the expectations of Master and Senior Sister. This Senior Sister of Kanghai Peak seemed to think that she was disappointed because she was absent-minded just now, but in fact, Bairuoxi just felt that the vague figure at the end of the road to becoming an immortal had an inexplicable sense of familiarity. Enlingyu's eyes turned to the back of the green skirt that was not stained with dust, and she sighed, Senior Kingdi is really a role model for our generation. It would be great if we can catch up with her in the future. Bairuoxi said softly. Yao Meng is the Empress of Hedao, and she is also born with Taoism. It is not an exaggeration to say that she is the best Taoist partner in the minds of most cultivators. However, most people don't know what the real Yao Meng is like. But as Bairuoxi's realm improves, the memory of the fight between Tianhewan Palace Lianyu and Yao Meng that day gradually emerges in her mind. Whether there is any relationship between Kingdi and Malang, Bairuoxi already has a vague answer in her heart at this time. But even if it is Kingdi, don't think of taking Malang away. Lianji Peak. Ya Lingxian flew to the depths of Lianji Peak. The time lock on her back vibrated slightly, and the lock guided her to fly to a certain villa. On the other side, as Musian's meditation time in the heavenly palace gradually passed, Lan Mulian began to feel something was wrong in the villa at this moment. It stands to reason that he should not be able to stay in the heavenly palace for so long, but from just now to now, nearly 2 hours have passed. But Musian's spiritual consciousness has not been damaged at all, that is to say, he should have obtained some opportunities in the heavenly palace. Lan Mulian's eyes flickered slightly, and she stared quietly at Musian's slightly closed eyes, high nose, and handsome face. After a moment of silence, she gently raised her hand, and her slightly cool slender fingers passed over Musian's face, staring quietly. Then, for some reason, she sighed softly and silently withdrew her palm. When she lowered her eyes, she didn't notice that Musian had recovered from his previous meditation. He opened his eyes slightly, lowered his eyelids, and glanced at the beautiful woman in white dress opposite him who could put her full breasts on the desk. If you can't see your toes when you look down, you are the most beautiful woman in the world, this is not necessarily true. But Lan Murian, whether in figure or appearance, can be called a beauty that can topple a country and a city, and she is not tainted by the mundane world. Musian just woke up, and when he woke up, he felt Lan Murian's slightly cool hands touching his face, so he resisted the urge to open his eyes. At this moment, he was surprised and relieved. What surprised him was that the senior sister had just touched him, what relieved him was that the senior sister had just touched him. Although I knew that the senior sister looked cold, but in fact, she was a little bit sultry inside, but I didn't expect that she would touch me when I fell asleep. If this scene was seen by the disciples of the sect, Musian would probably receive a lot of challenge letters the next day. Lan Mulian's position in the hearts of the disciples in the sect is unimaginable. Even though there are still people like Biruoxi who can match her beauty in the sect, this senior sister is always the most admired one in the hearts of most disciples. Musian is also one of them. The difference between him and others is that most people only hide their thoughts in their hearts, while Musian has put them into action a long time ago. Musian did not open his eyes at the first moment. He wanted to see if his senior sister would do anything else during his coma. Although Lan Mulian is very powerful, it is impossible for her to use the heavenly fate saint body to spy on the origin of others all the time. As long as she does not use her spiritual consciousness to scan Musian's body, it is difficult to find that he is playing dead at this moment. At this time, Musian suddenly heard a sigh from the cold beauty beside him. Lan Mulian stared at Musian's sleeping face with complicated eyes. In fact, her feelings towards this guy were quite complicated. She had always regarded him as a stranger to whom she could confide her inner feelings. Who knew that one day, this stranger would become her junior brother? And he also secretly expressed his admiration for her. To be honest, Lan Mulian had seen too many pursuits from others in the past, so she didn't feel much. Even when she knew that Musian had given Snow Lotus to several people at the same time, she was not particularly angry, but she felt a little uncomfortable. Until that day when he returned to the void after refining his soul, he left the sect and went to Tianqian City to buy Osmanthus cake, and even gave her the enlightenment seeds that he had not refined. After that, she began to examine her heart. And when the master proposed that the winner of the Ascension Conference would receive an extra prize that day, she knew what kind of feelings she had for Musian. It's just that it's difficult for her to express her inner feelings to others. After all, in the eyes of the disciples in the sect, Lan Mulian is the image of a cold iceberg Snow Lotus, a genius in Juzhu, and even the first person in the younger generation of Juzhu. Looking at the entire Juzhu, Lan Murian is the only one who has reached the state of spiritual cultivation and returned to the void at this age. And she has always maintained this image. While maintaining the image of a cold senior sister, she watched Musian being intimate with other women but turned a blind eye. It would be a lie to say that she was not tormented in her heart. But she has been pretending for too long and no longer knows how to express her feelings directly. Only at this time can she make people feel at ease. When Musian is asleep, she can reveal some of her inner thoughts without any scruples. Including looking at him like this. It would be nice if time could stay here. Lan Murian gently placed her palm on the back of Musian's hand, and as her clear and pleasant voice sounded in the hall, Musian's heart was moved, knowing that this was the best time. Senior sister really has feelings for me, and the past efforts have not been in vain. Musian was quite relieved, his eyelids moved slightly, and he was about to open his eyes. At this moment, a clear and crisp voice that was neither cold nor hot sounded lightly in the hall of the villa. Senior sister is touching a disciple who is still meditating and practicing like this. If it gets out, it seems a bit bad, right? As the voice sounded, Lan Murian slowly raised his head and looked over. Ya Lingxian stood at the door of the hall at some point, her purple skirt fluttering in the cold wind, looking at them expressionlessly. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 324. As Ye Lingxuan's calm voice sounded in the hall, Lan Murian was awakened from her thoughts. She looked up and saw a slender figure standing at the door. She was wearing a gorgeous dress, with beautiful patterns embroidered on her purple dress. Such a gorgeous and elegant dress, matched with a classical and exquisite face, exuded the noble elegance of a princess of the dynasty. Although she is still a little beauty waiting to bloom, in another year or two, her appearance will be enough to be compared with a woman like Lan Murian. Even now, she also has a pure temperament different from Lan Murian. If Musian saw the scene at this time, he would probably secretly sigh at Ye Lingxuan's beauty. It's just a pity that he can't see anything now. Although he is also in the hall at this moment, Musian dare not open his eyes at all. Why did Lingxian come to Lianji Peak? Shouldn't she be meditating and practicing in peace? Feeling the cold silence in the hall, Musian's little soul seemed to be roaring in regret. If he hadn't thought of catching the fish of senior sister just now, Ye Lingxian wouldn't have seen such an embarrassing scene. Senior sister's hand was even on the back of his hand. Ye Lingxian glanced at her inconspicuously, then raised her head and said with a smile, "Senior sister, there is a competition tomorrow. Why are you with Master Mu so late at night instead of practicing? If it gets out, it may damage your reputation. After all, there are many people in the sect who secretly admire you." Lan Murian raised her eyebrows slightly, and a smile like breaking ice appeared on her cold and beautiful face. Her clear voice sounded, "My brother has questions about the practice, so he took the initiative to ask me tonight to ask about the practice. It is normal for fellow disciples to help each other. If junior sister Lingxian doesn't understand anything, she can also come to me." Senior sister's hand is holding brother Mu's hand like this. Is this also part of guiding him to practice? Ye Lingxuan's eyes inadvertently glanced at Lan Murian's hand holding Musian, and her tone was meaningful. Unexpectedly, Lan Murian smiled brightly and said lightly, "I am checking the pulse of my junior brother and confirming the direction of his spiritual energy flow. Do you need to hold hands like this when checking the pulse? Also, didn't you just touch brother Mu's face?" Ye Lingxian wanted to tell Lan Murian about the scene she just saw through the lock of desolate time and questioned Lan Murian in person. "How could you, a senior sister who entered the sect earlier than us, touch a sleeping junior brother?" But thinking that if she opened her mouth, the other party would ask her why she knew about this, after imagining that scene, Ye Lingxian finally held back. The daughter of the restricted area, the goddess in the hearts of her fellow brothers, turned out to be a voyeur. Even though she knew that Lan Murian would not leak such a thing, Ye Lingxian was thin-skinned and did not ask in the end. "Why is brother Mu unconscious?" Ye Lingxian calmed down a little and suddenly asked. "It's related to the road to becoming an immortal," Lan Murian said concisely. "The road to becoming an immortal." Ye Lingxuan's eyes flickered slightly, and she recalled the black-robed man she had seen at the end of the road to becoming an immortal. Could it be that it was really him? Ye Lingxuan's eyes flickered with a strange luster, as if she was thinking about something important. At this time, Lan Murian continued, "I have heard in the past that someone in the forbidden area had ascended to the immortal world. You should know a lot about the immortal world. Sister Lan, do you even know this?" Ye Lingxuan's eyes flickered slightly, and she was surprised. In fact, Ye Lingxian didn't know much about some secrets in the past, but she did hear from the elders in the forbidden area that there were indeed powerful people in the forbidden area who ascended to the immortal world. To be precise, it was not the powerful people in the forbidden area, but the powerful people of the Ye family. In ancient times, the forbidden area and the Ye family belonged to the same family, but later the Ye family split, the forbidden area gradually became stronger, and the original Ye family gradually declined. If it weren't for the heavenly aura of the Ye family, Ye Lingxian would not have had any dealings with the Ye family later. However, this is just a legend after all. Whether the great man of the Ye family really ascended to the immortal world, I think only the great men of her time know. "Have you and brother Mu been to the heavenly palace tonight?" Ye Lingxian asked. Lan Mulian nodded slightly, but I don't know why junior brother is still in a coma. When she said this, her eyes fell on Musian, who was still in a coma beside her. It stands to reason that even if he got some immortal fate in the heavenly palace, his spiritual consciousness should not have returned for so long. Unless, Musian's spiritual consciousness is trapped in the heavenly palace. Thinking of this, Lan Mulian glanced at Musian with her clear and beautiful eyes. In her eyes, Musian's cauldron structure was also completely included in her field of vision. And the spiritual consciousness that returned to the body at this time was naturally seen through by her origin and completely fell into her field of vision. And this glance also made Lan Mulian's expression stagnate slightly. As if she couldn't believe it, she scanned Musian's body with her spiritual sense again. At this moment, her heart was slightly stirred. This guy has already woken up. Thinking of what she had just done, Lan Mulian's cold and beautiful eyes rarely flashed a trace of panic. When did he wake up? Did he know what she had just done? At this moment, she was so confused that even Ye Lingxian beside her noticed something unusual. Ye Lingxian's spiritual consciousness swept over Musian's body, and then she understood something. There was a hint of meaning in her eyes, and she glanced at Musian faintly. The atmosphere in the hall suddenly became strangely quiet. The two girls stared at Musian silently, wanting to see how long he was going to perform. This is the most dangerous place to raise little white sharks in the fish pond. After they gradually grow into great white sharks, their strength improves, and their spiritual consciousness far exceeds that of ordinary people. In addition, one of them is a natural spiritual body with a strong affinity for spiritual energy, and the other can see through the origin of all things. When the two girls' spiritual consciousness swept over Musian's body, they both captured the awakened spiritual consciousness in his body. Musian gritted his teeth and slowly opened his eyes, with a trace of confusion in his eyes. He turned his head slightly and looked at his senior sister and said, "Senior sister, how long have I been unconscious?" "You should know this better than me," Lan Mulian answered coldly. There was a trace of anger in her eyes, obviously thinking that Musian was just pretending to sleep and wanted to catch her. But, she was really caught by Musian. Recalling what she had done just now while Musian was sleeping, Lan Mulian's slender hands on her knees subconsciously grabbed the skirt of the white skirt. Her eyes were full of coldness, and the shame hidden under this coldness. Musian was full of helplessness in his heart, and then, he turned his head slightly and saw the elegant purple skirt girl behind him, pretending to be surprised. "Lingxian, why are you here too? Do you have any questions about cultivation that you want to ask your senior sister?" This meant that he came to his senior sister tonight to ask for advice on the exercises, not just for a late night tryst or something. Ye Lingxian said with a smile, "Tonight, the road to immortality that may not appear once in 10,000 years appeared in Lianji Peak. I came to take a look and chat with my senior sister. I didn't expect brother Mu to be there too. Is it not going to disturb you and sister Lan? If it is disturbing, I can go back now." Ye Lingxian had a reserved and sweet smile on her face. But Musian read the danger in the smile. Ye Lingxian tilted her head slightly. "What's wrong?" Musian shook his head and said, "Sister Lingxian, don't worry." "So, did brother Mu get the answer he wanted from sister Lan?" Ye Lingxian asked, staring at him straight. Musian gave a positive answer. Then, before she could speak, Musian activated the cauldron, and in an instant, a wisp of spiritual energy in his cauldron quietly circulated in his body. As a natural spirit, Ye Lingxian naturally noticed it at the first time and subconsciously looked at him. "Brother Mu, why is this spiritual energy so special?" Lan Mulian's eyes also flickered slightly, completely forgetting what happened just now, and her attention was also attracted. At this moment, the spiritual energy in Musian's body is completely different from when he came here before. The concentration of spiritual energy in Musian's cauldron at this moment is far more than 3 times the current level. "Sister, Do you still remember the heaven that you and I set foot on tonight? Muzian asked. Lan Mulian was an extremely intelligent ice and snow beauty. She immediately raised her head and said, "Did you absorb the spiritual energy in the heavenly palace?" She quickly shook her head again and said, "There are rules in the heavenly palace. It should be impossible to absorb the spiritual energy there." Muzian immediately said, "In fact, I saw the rules of the heavenly palace later, and I also passed the test of the heavenly palace." The cold senior sister Lan heard this and quietly straightened her sitting posture and said reservedly, "What are the rules of the heavenly palace?" Muzian considered. "The heavenly palace rules I saw at that time said that if male cultivators set foot in it, the restrictions were not too severe, and if female cultivators, if you have to say, the restrictions are not big either." Lan Mulian raised her eyebrows slightly. "What do you mean?" Seeing that Lan Mulian and Ye Lingxian were successfully attracted by this topic, Muzian felt relieved and continued, "Women need to wear skirts and stockings to set foot in, this is the rule I saw in the heavenly palace at that time. It is best to use nirvana silk," Muzian added. Lan Murian frowned slightly and whispered, "The master of the heavenly court really has a bad taste." Muzian pondered, "Maybe there is a reason why he has to do this." Lan Murian pondered for a long time, but still seemed to have not figured out what the master of the heavenly court wanted to do. She couldn't help but shook her head gently and returned to her aloof attitude. She raised her eyes and looked at Muzian. "So, the spiritual energy in your cauldron has now been transformed into the spiritual energy of the heavenly court." Muzian nodded slightly. "If I can practice in the heavenly court for another month, I should be able to enter the 5th level of refining spirit. 1 level per month, this is a very terrifying concept. If it is supplemented by the medicinal materials given by the first seed before, in 1 or 2 months, Muzian may be able to successfully advance to the 6th level of refining spirit." Ye Lingxian looked at Muzian meaningfully and said, "Since Brother Mu has already consulted senior sister, do you want to go back to meditate and practice, or do you plan to stay here tonight?" Muzian looked normal and smiled faintly. "It is the time of the Ascension Conference. If I stay here all the time, it will disturb senior sister's practice, not to mention that I also need to digest the information today." As he said that, he looked at Lan Murian and said, "Senior sister, I really trouble you tonight." Ye Lingxian looked at Muzian, who stood up, tilted her head slightly, and her eyes passed Muzian and fell on the cold beauty. She raised her proud white chin slightly and smiled, "Senior sister, let's go." Lan Murian glanced at Ye Lingxian lightly, and a faint arc appeared at the corner of her mouth. She took out a box of perfume from her sleeve and gently placed it on the table, saying casually, "Pastor brother, you don't have to thank me. After all, I accepted a box of perfume from you. It's only natural for me to help you." Ye Lingxian's eyes suddenly froze on the box of perfume on the table, and Muzian saw that the situation was not good. His eyelids twitched slightly, coughed twice, and said, "Let's go." He suddenly regretted giving the perfume away. Although it was a last resort at the time, only giving the ointment could make the beauty happy, but if Lan Murian brings up this ointment again in the future, Sister Mengru knows about this, she will make my head into a stool in the future. I should take some time to go down the mountain to Tianqian City during this period, Muzian thought to himself. When Muzian left the villa, Ye Lingxian had already left without saying a word, leaving Muzian with only a beautiful back. Muzian did not catch up with Ye Lingxian, but deliberately kept a distance. After confirming that they had left Lianji Peak, he chased after her like a wild dog. "Sister Lingxian, why are you walking so fast? Wait for me." Ye Lingxian didn't want to pay any attention to Muzian at all, and increased her flying speed. "The more I thought about it, the more aggrieved I felt. It was clearly said that the person I liked the most was Sister Lingxian, but I turned around and gave senior sister Lan the ointment. What is this?" Muzian speeded up and stopped in front of Ye Lingxian, grabbed Ye Lingxian's wrist, looked at her and said, "Sister Lingxian, Wait a minute. I came here tonight for the cultivation method. You just saw that I absorbed the spiritual energy of the heaven. It will also be good for you, right? Musian said helplessly. However, Yalingxian immediately turned her face away and said coldly, Mr. Mu has so many confidants around him. Who knows who you absorb the spiritual energy of the heaven for? And you also gave me the ointment. Seeing her stop, Musian was immediately happy. He knew that Yalingxian was just arrogant and reluctant to let her go. He immediately said solemnly, the spiritual energy in the heaven is very special. The only person who can make it work best is Sister Lingxian. What I did tonight is naturally for you. What about the ointment? Yalingxian glanced at him coldly. Musian was startled, then shook his head and smiled, my senior sister took good care of me in the past, so. Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbs feed -01, container, tabula below article feed, placement, below article feed, target. Type, mix. So you gave her the ointment, her tone was full of indifference. Musian was silent for a moment, and sighed softly, actually, I didn't want to tell you so early. Musian lowered his head and stared at the girl in front of him, and said softly, from the beginning, I planned to give you a unique ointment, but, I originally planned to treat it as a surprise. Yalingxian obviously didn't believe it, and said unhappily, Brother Mu is the best at lying. When she said this, she raised her eyes, and her peach blossom eyes were full of resentment and displeasure. However, such resentment makes those peach blossom eyes even more lovely and charming. I'm afraid Brother Mu has said this to more than one person, right? This Brother Mu is really hateful, indecisive, but it makes people reluctant to let him go. Yalingxian loves and hates Musian, secretly gnashing her teeth, and the chain of desolate time in her sleeves is ready to move, as if ready to tie Musian back to the restricted area at any time. Musian raised his hand and swore, I can swear that I have only promised to give Sister Lingxian a surprise so far. The Great Way resonates, and the heaven and earth can witness it. Seeing this, Yalingxian quickly raised her hand to cover Musian's mouth, looked up at him, and said, Brother Mu, don't do this. What if you are really punished by the thunder tribulation? Musian gently grasped her soft little hand, lowered his head and stared, and said softly, as long as it can make you happy, everything is worth it. Being stared at by Musian so scorchingly, Yalingxian pursed her red lips, her tone softened slightly, and whispered, I believe you. Feeling Musian take a step further and hug her slender waist, Yalingxian felt shy and a little expectant in her heart, raising her peach blossom eyes and staring at him, Brother Mu, are you going home tonight? Musian understood, lowered his head and kissed Yalingxian's fair face, I will go home with you tonight. Yalingxian pushed him away gently and reservedly, don't do this, we are still outside, if someone sees us. Do you mean you can go back? Musian deliberately teased. He looked at Yalingxian standing with her head down, her beautiful face slightly flushed. He couldn't help but reach out and lightly lift the girl's chin, intending to taste the girl's pink lips before going back. However, at this moment, Yalingxian suddenly seemed to have noticed something, and subconsciously turned her head to look at the immortal road. In this immortal road that was about to disappear, there seemed to be a beautiful figure walking slowly down from it. The figure disappeared in a flash, as if it had never appeared. However, a trace of doubt flashed in Yalingxian's eyes. She always felt that this woman looked familiar, as if she had seen her somewhere before. At the same time, Musian also noticed something unusual and looked up. Like Yalingxian, his eyes were also full of doubt. Although he knew that there were great powers who had ascended to heaven, it was really strange that they would choose to descend before the immortal road disappeared. That night, the cold winter came. In the depths of the glazed palace on the north bank, a young man in a black robe slowly opened his eyes and woke up from meditation. The room was quiet, without a single sound. It's no wonder. The immortal road appeared, and all the cultivators in the glazed palace went to join in the fun. In the past, you would have been unable to resist going there to try to seek this opportunity. However, Yayu was extremely calm at this time, and he didn't even leave the room. It's not that he gave up the chance to become an immortal, but he knew that this immortal road would not allow him to reach the heaven. His chance to become an immortal has not come yet. You are much calmer than before, not bad, the old man in the body said with satisfaction. After all, the teacher said before that now is not the best time to set foot in the heaven. If that's the case, there is no need to get involved in this matter. Concentrating on cultivation is the top priority, Yayu said lightly. The old man smiled and said, "You are right. If you focus on your cultivation, you will have a promising future. As for Musian, it's okay to put it aside for now. After all, you will run into him sooner or later in this Ascension Conference, unless he is defeated or gives up. However, based on my understanding of him, although Musian is cunning, he is still a proud person in essence. This time he represents the inner disciples of the library, and it is impossible for him to give up halfway. And this is your chance." Musian, Yayu clenched his fist slightly, with a touch of excitement in his eyes. The teacher is right. Musian represents the library this time, and it is impossible for him to give up halfway. As long as he can win all the way, he will run into Musian sooner or later. And by then, every time at the Ascension Conference, there will be examples of occasionally accidentally injuring others. As long as you can run into Musian, you can completely trample him under your feet in front of Bairuoxi and others, proving how wrong her decision was. When he thought of this, Yayu felt a little more impatient. But now he had to be calm, and not lose his mind. Yayu was about to close his eyes, when he suddenly heard the old man's surprised voice. Yayu was about to ask, but he realized that a woman had appeared in the room. She was shrouded by huaba, so she couldn't see clearly, and even her face couldn't be seen clearly, but she gave people a flawless feeling. Yayu reacted almost immediately and stood up suddenly. The woman looked at Yayu for a few times and smiled faintly. "So that's it, are you the descendant of the Ye family? It seems that she has a good talent. At a young age, she has already reached the 3rd level of soul refining, and even obtained the energy of heaven." "Who are you?" Yayu said in a deep voice. The woman glanced at him and chuckled. "My identity, the old man in your body should know." Yayu was shocked, his eyes widened, staring at the blurry figure of the woman. This person actually knew that there was a remnant soul in his body. At this time, an old figure slowly appeared in the room. He stared at the woman in front of him with turbid eyes and said, "Ye Kingzin, you have already ascended to the fairyland, why are you here?" "Ye Kingzin?" Yayu was stunned for a moment, then he seemed to remember something, raised his head suddenly, and said, "Ye Kingzin, you are one of the ancestors of the Ye family, the Ye Kingzin who ascended to the fairyland in the past. I didn't expect that after such a long time, there are still his descendants who remember me." Ye Kingzin chuckled and looked at Yayu a few times. "You have good talent, good opportunities, and even the aura of heaven." Yayu heard this and said hatefully, "If it weren't for Musian, I should have 2 auras of heaven." Musian, there was a trace of doubt in Ye Kingzin's beautiful eyes. This time, the road to becoming an immortal was rarely revealed, and she also took this opportunity to let a ray of spiritual consciousness descend to the heaven, wanting to see how the descendants of the Ye family are doing now, and to travel around the 9 states and meet old acquaintances. But now it seems that after she left, the Ye family doesn't seem to be doing very well. "Who is Musian?" Ye Kingzin asked. When he heard the 3 words Musian, Yayu's eyes were filled with hatred, and he immediately explained Musian's past actions one by one. Of course, it was only a truthful explanation in Yayu's eyes, but in fact there were many exaggerated elements. When he heard the last part, Kingzin's beautiful eyes narrowed slightly, and said, "You mean, your two sisters were also bewitched by him? He even took away your heavenly aura?" Yu nodded slightly and said bitterly, "This person is cunning by nature, and now he has the protection of Linglong and Kingdi, so." Kingzin said faintly, "There will be a competition with Musian tomorrow, right? Since you are a descendant of the Ye family, I naturally can't sit idly by. Tomorrow, I will go to the Ascension platform in person to see why this Musian you mentioned dares to take away the immortal fate of my Ye family's descendants." Yu's eyes were filled with joy, and he immediately raised his hands and clasped his fists. "Thank you, ancestor. With the help of this great man, the possibility of stepping on Musian in the future will be even higher. After all, among the ancestors of the Ye family, the only one who ascended to heaven was this great man in the Hedeo realm, Ye Kingzin. But I didn't expect that she would find him in the first place." Yu's eyes flashed with excitement, and he seemed quite surprised. And Ye Kingzin turned his head slightly and looked in the direction of Lianji Peak. At that time, she saw a pair of young monks near Lianji Peak. The aura of the purple-dressed girl was suspected to come from the reincarnation pool in the restricted area. So, that girl should be the daughter of that guy? And the young monk next to her at that time was Musian? Ye Kingzin's eyes flickered slightly, and there was a hint of thoughtfulness in her eyes. Liuli Palace, Dexan Garden. The warm candlelight lit up the room. Ye Lingxian lowered her head all the way, seeming a little shy, and did not speak all the way. After Ye Lingxian closed the door, Musian's eyes fell on the girl. Her back was slender, her snow-white shoulders were slightly exposed, and her delicate and moving face was faintly blushed, as if she was innocent and innocent. A pair of snow-white and slender legs were outlined under the light purple skirt, revealing a beautiful luster under the candlelight. Musian walked forward slowly, gently hugged Ye Lingxuan's waist, and his chest pressed against her beautiful back. "Brother Mu, wait a minute." However, at this moment, Ye Lingxian suddenly spoke softly to stop Musian. Then, the desolate time chain in her sleeve flew out silently, and she looked at the young man behind her and said, "Brother Mu, can you cooperate with Lingxian to do an experiment first? I want to try the ability of the desolate time chain now." Musian was stunned, and subconsciously glanced at the golden chain with a bit of hesitation in his eyes. He really had a bad memory of the lock. Back in the Yaokai ancestral land, he was once bound by Yao Meng with vines. Although the process was pleasant, it was really uncomfortable to recall the feeling of being restricted in action. However, after seeing Ye Lingxuan's weak appearance, Musian finally softened his heart. "Okay, I'll do as you say." Ye Lingxuan's eyes flashed with a cunning look, and she said softly, "Brother Mu is so nice. This girl probably learned bad things from being with Bairu Oxy. She didn't know how to act like a spoiled child before, but now she knows how to control her husband properly." The chain of desolate time bound Musian in it, and then Ye Lingxian took Musian's hand and came to the bed, letting him lie down in front of the bed. Just as Musian was looking forward to Ye Lingxuan's next move, Ye Lingxian took out a handkerchief and gently tied it around Musian's eyes. Musian's heart jumped, and he hurriedly said, "Sister Lingxian, are we playing a little too much?" It was only then that he realized that something was wrong. Ye Lingxian put her hands behind her back, looked down at Musian, and said with a smile, "Didn't Brother Mu promise on the way back just now that he would do whatever Lingxian wanted tonight? How could I know that you would take out the lock of the wasteland as soon as you came up?" Musian said tactfully, "At least don't cover your eyes." Ye Lingxian said softly, "I know, I will unlock it later, don't worry." As she said that, her eyes flickered slightly, and she said softly, "Brother Mu, wait a moment, I will go out to take a bath first." After that, without giving Musian a chance to speak again, she turned around and quietly left the room. Afterwards, she showed a hint of hesitation on her face, but finally walked along the corridor to a door. "Is Chiener here?" Ye Lingxian gently knocked on Ye Qian's door.